Hey guys, tonight we are slipping back in time, not to a grand ballroom or a romanticised cobblestone lane, but to a place far more intimate and frankly far more revealing, the Victorian bedroom. We're going to peel back the heavy velvet curtains and see what life was really like, starting from the very first moment you open your eyes. Imagine the air, thick with the faint smell of coal smoke and damp wool. Feel the profound, bone-deep chill that central heating has banished from our modern lives. This isn't the clean, curated version of the 19th century you see in movies. This is the unvarnished truth. And a small reality check for you. If you were suddenly transported here with your 21st century immune system and expectations of comfort, you probably wouldn't survive the first 1 month. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I love to see where you're all tuning in from, so please post your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir from a heavy, dreamless sleep, not because of a gentle sunbeam or a digital alarm, but because of a familiar, pressing need. A deep, pre-dawn gloom still clings to the room, and the air you breathe out plumes in a faint ghostly cloud before you. It's cold, not just a little chilly, but a damp, penetrating cold that seems to emanate from the very walls, the floorboards, the soul of the house itself. There is no furnace to rumble to life, no thermostat to nudge upwards. The small fireplace in the corner is a black skeletal maw, its ashes cold and grey from the night before. Your first thought isn't about the day ahead or what you'll have for breakfast. Your first conscious, urgent thought is about bladder management. And so your attention turns to the single most important piece of technology in the room. It's not a clock or a lamp. It is the chamber pot. You swing your legs out from under the heavy pile of quilts and blankets, your bare feet meeting the floor with a soft, shocking slap of cold. You fumble in the dark, your hands searching for the familiar curve of the ceramic vessel tucked neatly under the bed. There it is. You pull it out, the porcelain colder than the floor, its surface slick with condensation. In the stillness of the morning, the sound of its use is startlingly loud, an intimate echo in the quiet dark. This, right here, is your first act of hygiene for the day. A carefully managed deposit into a decorated bowl, which will, for the time being, remain in the room with you. You slide the pot back under the bed, a little farther away this time, as if a few extra inches will make a difference. These pots, sometimes called a jerry or a pot, were ubiquitous. In a middle-class home like this one, it might be part of a matching bedroom set, adorned with painted bluebells or weeping willows, a strange attempt to beautify a fundamentally unpleasant object. For the more politically minded or whimsical, you could even find chamber pots with the face of an unpopular politician painted on the bottom, offering a unique form of daily protest. For now, its contents will slowly perfume the air, a low note in the room's olfactory signature, waiting for a housemaid, or, if you're not so lucky, you, to perform the unenviable task of slopping out. Now that the immediate crisis is averted, you can take in your surroundings. Heavy, dark furniture looms in the shadows. A large wardrobe, a chest of drawers, and a small washstand holding a pitcher and bowl. There are no built-in closets, those were an architectural rarity. Your clothes live in these hulking pieces of mahogany or oak. The windows are swathed in thick, heavy curtains, often velvet, layered over lace panels. Historians still argue whether the thick, heavy curtains so popular in Victorian homes were purely for fashion and privacy, or if they served a practical purpose in trapping a meagre amount of heat, a futile but hopeful barrier against the drafts that snaked through every window frame. You can see your breath, so their effectiveness seems debatable at best. On the inside of the glass, a delicate, feathery layer of frost has formed, painting a beautiful cold filigree over the grimy view of the street outside. You crawl back into the bed, pulling the covers up to your chin. It's not a particularly comfortable bed by modern standards. The mattress is a heavy sack, densely stuffed with horsehair, straw, or perhaps feathers if you're well off. It's lumpy. It rustles when you move. Over the years, it has developed permanent divots and hills, a topographical map of countless nights of sleep. The idea of memory foam would seem like alien sorcery. This mattress doesn't cradle you. It begrudgingly accommodates you. It's less of a sleeping surface and more of a slightly less hard version of the floor. The room is silent, save for the distant, rhythmic clopping of a horse pulling a cart down the lane. The day hasn't truly begun, but the Victorian reality of hygiene has already made itself known. It's a reality of cold, of damp, of managing bodily functions in close quarters. The very air you are breathing is a mixture of last night's exhalations, the faint but growing odour from under the bed, and the ever-present scent of coal dust that seeps in from outside. Your journey into the world of Victorian cleanliness has started not with a splash of hot water, but with a shiver, a porcelain pot, and the slow realisation that clean is a very, very relative term. The weak grey light filtering through the frosty window pane tells you that delaying the inevitable is no longer an option. Lying here in your lumpy cocoon of wool and horsehair won't get the day started. With a deep breath and a sense of grim resignation, you throw back the covers for the second time. The cold hits you like a physical blow, raising goosebumps on your skin beneath your long, simple nightshirt or nightgown. You pad across the frigid floorboards, your destination the small dedicated piece of furniture in the corner, the washstand. This is your bathroom door and your bathroom sink, your morning shower, your entire daily washing station, all contained in a small wooden table. Upon it sits a large ceramic pitcher or ewer filled with water and a matching wide-mouthed basin. Yesterday evening a servant, or perhaps you yourself, hauled this water up from the kitchen pump. It has sat here all night, slowly dropping to the same biting temperature as the room. You pick up the heavy pitcher, your fingers aching slightly from the cold porcelain, and pour a small amount into the basin. The sound is a clear, crisp splash, echoing in the quiet. There's no faucet to turn, no instant access to hot or cold. This is your allotment of water for the morning's hygiene. You dip your hands in. The shock of the icy water is breathtaking. It feels less like cleansing and more like a form of penance. You cup your hands, bring the water to your face and splash. It's a brisk, painful awakening. You rub your face vigorously, not just to clean it, but to try and generate some friction, some warmth. You then dip the corner of a thin linen cloth into the basin and proceed with your morning ablutions. This is not a luxurious soak. It is a targeted, strategic mission. You scrub behind your ears, around your neck and under your arms. Every swipe of the damp cloth is a brisk, shivery affair. This goal is not to feel squeaky clean, but to remove the most obvious grime and sleep from your person, to become socially acceptable for the day ahead. This limited wash is the standard. The idea of a full-body immersion in water every morning would have been considered not just wildly impractical, but quite possibly mad. A full bath was a monumental event, a complex logistical operation that took hours of planning and labour. First, a large tin or copper tub would need to be brought into the room, usually placed in front of the fireplace. Then, bucket by bucket, water would be hauled up from the kitchen, where it was being heated in massive kettles over the fire. It would take dozens of trips to fill the tub with enough water to even sit in, a Herculean task for the household staff. After the bath, a relatively brief affair, as the water would cool quickly, the entire process had to be done in reverse, emptying the tub bucket by bucket. It was an exhausting, disruptive and expensive ordeal in terms of fuel and labour. Consequently, for most people, a full bath was a weekly ritual at best, and for many a monthly or even seasonal one. This is why your washstand is so essential. It's the 9th century equivalent of a wet wipe. After your quick scrub down, you reach for a towel. It's not a fluffy, absorbent terry cloth masterpiece. It's a simple, thin piece of linen, and about as absorbent as a sheet of wax paper. You pat yourself dry, feeling slightly damp and still profoundly cold. The water in the basin is now grey and murky, a testament to the fact that you were indeed dirty. It will sit there, much like the contents of the chamber pot, until it's carried away to be dumped in the back garden or down a drain in the scullery. The Victorians had some clever halfway measures. For those who could afford it, there was the hip bath or sitz bath. This was a peculiar high-backed metal tub, shaped a bit like an armchair, that allowed a person to sit in water up to their waist. It required far less water and effort than a full tub, but allowed for a more thorough washing of the lower body. It was a compromise, a small nod to a deeper clean without the full day's chaos. Still, for your daily routine, it's just the pitcher and bowl. Historians still argue whether the infrequent nature of Victorian bathing was driven more by the sheer logistical difficulty or by the prevailing medical wisdom of the day. many prominent doctors genuinely advised against frequent hot baths. They feared that prolonged immersion in hot water would open the skin's pores, making the bather vulnerable to airborne diseases, or miasmas. A hot bath was thought to be weakening, to sap a person's vital energy and leave them susceptible to chills, fevers, and all manner of ailments. A quick cold splash, on the other hand, was seen as invigorating and fortifying, a way to close the pores and brace the body against the hostile environment. So as you stand there shivering, you can tell yourself this isn't neglect, it's preventative medicine. It's a very unconvincing argument when your teeth are chattering. You feel awake. You don't necessarily feel clean in the way a 21st century person understands the word. You feel surface level presentable. The thin layer of yesterday's grime has been disturbed and partially removed from the most visible areas. Your skin tingles, not with freshness, but with the lingering shock of the cold. This is the foundation of your daily hygiene, a quick, functional ritual born of necessity and questionable medical theory. The real work of smelling pleasant, however, is yet to come. Having braved the icy baptism of the washstand, you now turn your attention to the next critical phase of the morning ritual, scent management. The brief targeted scrub you just performed was merely a preliminary escassemise in the daily war against body odour. Now it's time to bring in the heavy artillery. You reach for a small, simple bar of soap resting in a ceramic dish. This isn't a bar of lavender and oat milk artisanal soap. This is a formidable functional brick of Victorian soap. As you lather it between your hands with the remaining cold water, a sharp, medicinal scent fills the air. This is very likely carbolic soap. Made with carbolic acid, a disinfectant derived from coal tar, it was one of the great hygiene innovations of the era. Its powerful, almost tar-like aroma was not seen as a drawback, but as a sign of its effectiveness. First popularised for use in surgery by Joseph Lister to sterilise instruments and wounds, carbolic acid quickly found its way into domestic products. People believed that its pungent smell was literally the smell of cleanliness, the scent of germs being annihilated. So you scrub your hands and perhaps give your underarms another quick soapy pass with the washcloth. The soap leaves your skin feeling tight and dry, and the assertive clinical smell clings to you. It's not a perfume, it's a declaration of sanitary intent. But carbolic soap is just the first layer of your olfactory armour. It neutralises, but it doesn't beautify. The Victorian era was a time of profound sensory contrasts. The streets reeked of horse manure, coal smoke and unwashed bodies, yet the upper-class individual was expected to smell divine. This created a massive market for perfumes, colognes and scented waters. On your dressing table, next to a silver-backed hairbrush, sits a small, elegant glass bottle. You unstop it, and a cloud of powerful floral fragrance escapes. It might be lavender, rosewater, or perhaps a more complex blend like Jockey Club or Florida Water. Popular proprietary scents of the day. You don't just dab this on your wrists, you use it liberally. You might sprinkle it onto a handkerchief to carry with you, a small scented shield to hold to your nose when navigating a particularly foul-smelling street. If you're a woman, you might apply it to your corsage, your gloves, and the hems of your petticoats. If you're a man, you'll splash it on your face and neck. The goal is to create a personal atmosphere, an aura of fragrant cleanliness that masks any underlying bodily reality and overwhelms the stench of the city. These perfumes were potent and long-lasting, a necessary counterpoint to a world that was, by and large, incredibly smelly. Some social critics of the time actually complained that the wealthy smelled so strongly of perfume it was just as offensive as the unwashed masses, just in a different, more expensive way. Of course, not all scents were for show. Many had perceived medicinal purposes. A popular item was the vinaigrette, a small ornate container, often made of silver, with a pierced lid. Inside, a tiny sponge was soaked in aromatic vinegar, infused with herbs like rosemary, sage and mint. This wasn't just a pleasant smell, it was believed to be a powerful prophylactic against disease. Remember that miasma theory? The idea that bad air caused illness? Well, a vinaigrette was your personal portable air purifier. When faced with a crowd or a sick room, you would hold your vinaigrette to your nose and inhale deeply, believing the sharp, aromatic fumes would ward off the invisible poisons in the air. It's the Victorian equivalent of carrying hand sanitizer, but for your lungs. Historians still argue whether the Victorians truly believed in the complete masking power of perfume, or if it was more of a social signal. Was the heavy floral scent meant to convince others you were clean, Or was it simply a sign that you belonged to a class that could afford such luxuries, a class that was supposed to be clean regardless of the underlying truth? The answer is likely a bit of both. Scent was a powerful signifier of status, separating the perfumed lady from the sweaty flower girl, the cologne gentleman from the grimy labourer. It was an olfactory uniform. Alongside perfumes, scented powders played a role. After drying yourself as best you can with that unhelpful linen towel, you might apply a light dusting of talcum or rice powder to your skin, especially in areas prone to chafing and dampness. These powders were often scented with violet or rose, adding another subtle layer to your personal fragrance cocktail. They help to absorb moisture, a critical function when you're encased in layers of tight clothing, and reduce the friction of fabric against skin. It's a trick that feels surprisingly modern, a distant ancestor to our deodorants and body powders. So now you stand in the cold room, a complex symphony of smells. You have the sharp, sterile base note of carbolic acid, the dominant heart notes of a heavy floral perfume, and the soft, powdery top note of violet. You haven't had a proper shower, you haven't used a modern deodorant with aluminum chlorohydrate, but you have successfully constructed a fragrant illusion of perfect hygiene. You smell like a respectable Victorian, and as you prepare to get dressed, you hope, with all your might, that the illusion will last until bedtime. Your face is clean, or at least cold water and carbolic soap clean. You smell acceptably of roses and hygiene theatre. Now it's time to address your mouth. You pick up your toothbrush. It's not a brightly coloured nylon bristled wonder. The handle is bone or ivory, and the bristles are made of badger or boar hair, which have a tendency to fall out and be accidentally swallowed. It's a bit of a luxury item. Many in the poorer classes would simply use a rough cloth and a finger. But you're middle class, so you have a dedicated tool for the job. Next, you need toothpaste, or rather tooth powder. It comes in a small tin or ceramic pot. You dip your damp brush into the pot, coating the bristles with a fine greyish powder. What is this magical substance? It's a delightful blend of things you probably wouldn't want near your mouth today. The base is often chalk or pulverised cuttlefish bone, which provides the abrasive quality. To this, manufacturers added a variety of alarming ingredients. A common and rather effective abrasive was charcoal or soot. So yes, you are literally brushing your teeth with ash. It worked, in a gritty, scouring sort of way. For flavouring, you might have oil of cloves or camphor. And for that clean feeling, some popular powders contain borax, a laundry boosting agent. You begin to brush with a sensation unfamiliar to a modern palate. It's gritty and chalky, with a strange medicinal aftertaste. The boar bristles are stiff and unforgiving on your gums. You scrub away, spitting the grey gritty foam into the now filthy basin on your washstand. There's no fluoride, of course. The concept of strengthening enamel wasn't understood. The entire goal of Victorian dental care was abrasion, to scrub away the visible stains and tartar that built up from a diet increasingly high in sugar. The whiter the teeth, the healthier they were assumed to be. A popular quirky tidbit from the era is the widespread use of areca nut tooth powders. Areca nut is a mild stimulant and a known carcinogen today, and while it was used as a tooth cleaner, it had the unfortunate side effect of staining the teeth and gums a lurid red. For some, this was seen as a fashionable and exotic look, a strange deviation from the pursuit of pearly whites. After a thorough scrubbing, you rinse your mouth with a swig of cold water from the pitcher, swishing it around and spitting it into the basin. Your teeth feel scraped. They might look a little brighter, but the process has been less than pleasant. And as you run your tongue over your teeth, a quiet, gnawing fear might settle in. The fear of a toothache. In the Victorian era, a toothache was not a minor inconvenience to be solved with a quick trip to a sterile dental office. It was a prelude to butchery. There was no effective anaesthetic for routine procedures. Nitrous oxide and ether were being pioneered, but they were reserved for major surgeries and were often unreliable. For a simple tooth extraction, you could expect little more than a shot of whiskey and a firm grip on the chair. And who would you visit? Not necessarily a specialised dentist. Your most likely destination was the barber surgeon. As the name implies, this was the same fellow who cut your hair and gave you a shave. Barbers had a long history of performing minor medical procedures, a holdover from medieval times. They had the sharp tools and the steady hands, so why not pull teeth? You would sit in a chair, perhaps the very same one where a man just had his beard trimmed, and the barber surgeon would approach you with a fearsome-looking metal tool. The most common was the tooth key, a device that looked like a large, old-fashioned door key. The claw at the end was placed over the crown of the tooth, and the shaft was used as a lever against the jaw. The barber would then turn the key, hopefully dislodging the tooth. It was a brutal, inexact instrument that often broke the tooth, fractured the jaw, or took a chunk of gum with it. The piercing scream of the patient was just part of the ambient noise of a Victorian town. Historians still argue whether the rise of professional specialised dentistry in the later Victorian period was driven more by scientific advancement or by social class. Did the new dental surgeons, who set up lavish parlours in wealthy neighbourhoods, offer genuinely superior care? Or were they primarily selling a more refined, less terrifying experience to a clientele that could afford to separate their tooth pulling from their haircuts? It seems the answer is a combination. As the understanding of infection and anatomy grew, so too did the desire for a more dignified and less agonising patient experience. But for now, standing in your chilly room, that future is little comfort. You are acutely aware that every tooth in your head is a potential time bomb of agony. You have no dental floss, no mouthwash with antiseptic properties, and no understanding of the bacterial nature of plaque and decay. Your best defence is this morning ritual with your boar bristle brush and pot of chalky soot. You might also use a toothpick, often fashioned from a porcupine quill or a sliver of ivory, to pick at the debris between your teeth. Anything to keep the dreaded worm of decay at bay. So you brush with a little more vigour, a little more desperation. You are not just cleaning your teeth for appearance's sake. You are fighting a desperate holding actions against a future of pain, pliers, and the grim multitasking of your local barber. Now that your face and teeth have been attended to, it's time to get dressed. This is not a simple matter of pulling a t-shirt over your head and stepping into a pair of jeans. This is a complex, multi-layered process, and it begins with your undergarments, the secret foundation of your Victorian silhouette. You turn to the hulking wardrobe or the chest of drawers where your clothes are stored, not hung on individual hangers, but folded and stacked. You slept in a nightshirt or nightgown, a long garment of cotton or linen. You now remove it and stand for a moment in the cold air, completely unclothed. Your first layer of daywear is the chemise for a woman or a similar undershirt for a man. This is a simple, loose-fitting garment, usually made of white linen or cotton, that serves as a barrier between your body and your more expensive, harder-to-clean outer clothes. Think of it as a full-body undershirt. This is the layer that will absorb the majority of your sweat and skin oils throughout the day. Next, if you are a man, you pull on your drawers, which are essentially knee-length or ankle-length underpants, also made of cotton or linen. If you're a woman, you'll don a similar pair of drawers, often called pantalettes, which were essentially two separate legs joined only at the waistband. Now, here is the crucial point about these undergarments. They were not changed daily, far from it. In an age before washing machines, when laundry was a monumental all-day task, a horror we will explore in detail later, clothing was worn for as long as possible. A middle-class person might change their chemise and drawers once or twice a week. For the working classes, it could be much longer. They were worn until they were visibly soiled, or more likely until they smelled so épais they could no longer be ignored. This is where the real secret of the unwashed wardrobe lies. The Victorians placed a huge emphasis on the visible markers of cleanliness: a pristine white collar, spotless cuffs, a gleaming shirt front. These small detachable pieces were the focal point of hygiene. A man could wear the same shirt for days on end, but by simply changing his collar and cuffs, he could present an appearance of impeccable freshness to the world. These items were often made of starched linen or, in a brilliant feat of manufacturing, paper or celluloid. You could simply wipe your celluloid collar clean, or, if it was paper, throw it away and attach a new one. It was a clever illusion, hiding the fact that the main body of the shirt was likely quite grubby. For women, the same principle applied, though often with lace collars and cuffs. The part of the clothing that touched the skin and wasn't easily visible was left to its own devices for a surprisingly long time. You put on these undergarments that you also wore yesterday, and possibly the day before. They don't feel crisp and fresh. They feel lived in. They hold the faint human scent of you, a scent that your perfume will soon have to battle. And what about the outer layers? Your woolen trousers or your heavy serge dress? Your waistcoat, your jacket? These were almost never washed. Water, especially hot water, could shrink wool, cause dyes to run, and ruin the careful tailoring of a garment. a man would not dream of washing his suit. Instead, clothes were maintained through brushing, airing, and spot cleaning. At the end of the day, you would take a stiff bristled clothes brush and vigorously attack your garments, removing surface dust, mud splatters, and stray hairs. Then you might hang the item near an open window, weather permitting, or by the fire to air it out, the hope being that a good breeze or some dry heat would dissipate any lingering odours. For a stubborn stain, you might try a concoction of ammonia, turpentine, or even gasoline. It was a constant low-level war against grime. A quirky but telling accessory for this battle was the dress shield. These were small crescent-shaped pads of absorbent cotton, sometimes lined with rubber, that were tacked or pinned into the armpits of a dress or blouse. They were designed to absorb perspiration, protecting the delicate fabric of the garment from staining and odour. At the end of the day, you could remove the dress shields, wash them separately, and preserve the life of your dress. It was a tacit admission that people sweated, and that something had to be done about it without resorting to the disastrous act of washing the entire garment. Historians still argue about the true olfactory reality of a Victorian crowd. Contemporary accounts are filled with references to the great unwashed, but was the smell of a middle-class drawing room really as fresh as we imagine? Given the infrequent laundering, the reliance on airing and brushing, and the heavy woolen fabrics that trapped odours, it's likely that even a well-to-do gathering was permeated by a complex miasma of stale sweat, food smells, wood smoke, and heavy perfume. Our modern noses, accustomed to detergent-fresh fabrics, would probably find it quite overwhelming. So as you stand there layered in your slightly used undergarments, you're a walking example of this principle. Cleanliness is a performance. It's about managing the visible and masking the invisible. The pristine collar, the perfumed handkerchief, the brushed wool, these are the tools of your deception. You are building layer by layer a carefully constructed image of respectability, all while knowing the intimate, unwashed secrets that lie beneath. For a man, the next steps are relatively straightforward. Trousers, shirt, waistcoat, cravat, jacket. But if you are a woman, you're about to engage in a process of structural engineering upon your own body. You have your chemise and drawers on. Now over these comes the corset. The corset is perhaps the most infamous garment of the Victorian era, a potent symbol of female restriction. You take the stiff, whalebone-reinforced garment and wrap it around your torso. It's not just a shaping garment, it's a posture-enforcing cage. A housemaid, your mother, or your sister might be needed to help you with the lacing at the back. You hold onto the bedpost, take a deep breath, and she begins to pull the laces taut. The goal is to cinch the waist to a fashionable, wasp-like dimension, while simultaneously pushing the bust upwards and forwards. The pressure is immense, your ribs feel compressed, and taking a full deep breath becomes a conscious effort. You are now tight-laced. This practice was the subject of fierce debate even at the time. Doctors wrote extensively about the supposed medical consequences: crushed ribs, displaced internal organs, fainting spells, and even a weakened spine that could no longer support the body without the corset's aid. Satirical cartoons lampooned the vanity of it, showing women being winched into their corsets by pulleys. And yet, it was the absolute height of fashion. To appear in public without a corseted figure was to look sloppy, unrefined, and possibly morally loose. It was a requirement of respectability, so you stand there, breathing shallowly from the top of your lungs, your posture ramrod straight whether you like it or not. Over the corset go more layers. A corset cover to smooth the lines, and then the petticoats. Not one, but multiple petticoats, to create the voluminous bell-shaped skirt that was fashionable for much of the period. You might wear a stiff, horsehair-reinforced crinoline petticoat, or later in the century, a cage crinoline, a literal cage of steel hoops that held the skirt out. These understructures were lighter than layers upon layers of fabric, but they came with their own perils. A sudden gust of wind could flip the whole cage up, and they were notoriously dangerous near an open fire, a fact that led to thousands of deaths. With the foundational architecture in place, you can finally don your dress. It's a heavy, substantial garment of wool, silk, or cotton, likely with a high neck and long sleeves. It is, in essence, a beautiful, fashionable prison. Moving gracefully is a skill, sitting down is a negotiation with your cage crinoline, and bending over to pick something up is almost out of the question. Now, with your body shaped and clothed, you turn to your face. While the ideal Victorian woman was supposed to have a natural, unadorned beauty, This natural look often required a good deal of secret help. Heavy, obvious makeup was associated with actresses and prostitutes, so a respectable lady's cosmetic routine was a matter of stealth. You sit at your dressing table. You would never have anything so vulgar as a pot of rouge on display. Instead, you might have a booklet of papier poudré, tiny sheets of paper dusted with powdered colour that you could press subtly against your cheeks for a faint, healthy-looking blush. Or you might just pinch your cheeks hard before entering a room, a painful but effective short-term solution. The real danger, however, lay in the pursuit of a pale, luminous complexion. A porcelain white skin, untouched by the sun, was a sign of a lady of leisure. To achieve this, women turned to face powders and lotions, and the most effective and most popular ingredient for achieving this coveted pallor was lead. You might dust your face with a fine lead-based powder, or smooth on a lotion called milk of lilies, or liquid pearl, which were often little more than white lead mixed with water and perfume. Lead is, of course, a potent neurotoxin. With daily use, it would be absorbed through the skin, leading to a host of horrifying symptoms: fatigue, headaches, tremors, paralysis, and eventually a painful death. A truly bizarre and tragic side effect was that lead poisoning could cause the facial muscles to become paralysed, creating a smooth, musk-like expression that some initially mistook for youthful beauty. You are, in effect, poisoning yourself for the sake of looking fashionably pale. A quirky and even more dangerous cosmetic was the use of belladonna drops in the eyes. Belladonna, or deadly nightshade, would dilate the pupils, creating a wide-eyed, dreamy and romantic look that was highly prized. It also, unsurprisingly, caused blurred vision, light sensitivity, and could lead to blindness. Historians still argue about how widespread the knowledge of these cosmetic dangers truly was. Medical journals of the period frequently warned against the use of lead-based cosmetics, but this information trickled down to the general public slowly, if at all. Was the average woman a naive victim of the beauty industry, or did she suspect the risks but choose to take them in the relentless pursuit of the feminine ideal? The answer is likely lost to time, a secret kept in the boudoir. So you give your cheeks a final subtle pinch. You dust your nose with a faintly scented lead-laced powder. You stand up, your breathing restricted by your corset, your vision perhaps slightly blurry from the belladonna. You are now the picture of Victorian femininity, beautifully dressed, perfectly postured, and quietly, slowly poisoning yourself in the name of beauty. The quiet perils of the morning routine are complete. While the woman of the house has been encasing herself in whalebone and subtly poisoning her own face, your routine as a man has been less structurally demanding, but no less steeped in the peculiar logic of the age. You've pulled on your drawers, your shirt with its detachable collar, your trousers, and your waistcoat. Now for the final and perhaps most defining element of your appearance. You turn to the mirror, not to check for blemishes, but to admire your beard. And what a beard it is! This is not the carefully trimmed stubble or neat goatee of the 21st century. This is a magnificent, flourishing testament to Victorian masculinity. It might be a full, flowing spade beard, a set of dramatic, Dundreary whiskers that hang like furry curtains from your sideburns, or a handlebar moustache so waxed and curled it could hang a teacup from its tips. The mid to late Victorian era was the golden age of facial hair. After nearly a century of the clean-shaven Georgian and Regency look, the beard came roaring back into fashion, and it did so with a purpose. You pick up a special comb, perhaps made of tortoiseshell, and begin to groom your facial masterpiece. This isn't just about vanity. In the smog-choked, disease-ridden cities of the 19th century, the beard was promoted as a vital piece of personal protective equipment. This was the era of miasma theory, the belief that diseases like cholera and influenza were spread by bad air, filled with foul-smelling, invisible particles of decay. Your beard, you have been told by doctors and newspaper articles alike, is your natural respirator. It is a filter, a hairy mesh designed by nature itself to trap the soot, the dust, and the deadly germs before they can enter your lungs and wreak havoc. Each bristly strand is a tiny guardian of your health. This belief, known as the beard movement, was surprisingly mainstream. Pamphlets were written extolling the virtues of facial hair. Doctors gravely warned that shaving one's beard was an invitation to sore throats, bronchitis, and all manner of pulmonary diseases. The razor was seen as an unnatural instrument that left a man's delicate throat and lungs exposed to the polluted urban environment. So as you comb your whiskers, you feel a sense of virile scientific pride. This isn't just fashion, it's a public health statement growing directly from your face. It's a shame no one told you it also works as a convenient crumb catcher for your breakfast toast, a feature you'll discover later. Maintaining such an impressive face forest requires products. On your dressing table, next to your shaving mug now used only for tidying up your neck, is a pot of beard balm or moustache wax. You scoop a small amount onto your fingertips. It might be scented with sandalwood or bergamot. You work it through your beard, taming stray hairs, giving it a healthy sheen, and sculpting your moustache into a stiff, assertive shape. This pomade not only helps with styling, but also with waterproofing, which is more important than you might think. This brings us to one of the most wonderfully quirky inventions of the era, the moustache cup. This was a teacup or coffee mug with a small ceramic ledge, a moustache guard, built across the top. This little shelf protected your meticulously waxed moustache from the steam and liquid of your hot beverage, preventing a tragic case of waxy drooping. It was a simple, brilliant solution to a problem that only a Victorian gentleman could have. Owning a moustache cup was a sign that you took your facial hair, and therefore your health and appearance, very seriously. It was the ultimate accessory for the well-groomed man. Historians still argue whether the Great Victorian beard trend was truly born from sanitary concerns, or if the miasma filter theory was merely a convenient, scientific-sounding justification for a fashion that had other, deeper roots. The trend exploded in Britain after the Crimean War in the 1850s. Soldiers returning from the cold, harsh conditions of the war had grown beards out of necessity, as shaving was impractical in the field. They came home, and the beard was suddenly a symbol of rugged patriotism, military heroism, and weathered masculinity. It was a stark contrast to the foppish, clean-shaven look of the dandies of the previous generation. Was it the appeal of this new, rugged ideal of manhood, rather than the fear of germs that truly fueled the fashion? The debate continues, but it's likely a tangled mess of both. Of course, the irony is that from a modern germ theory perspective, a large beard is anything but hygienic. It's a perfect trap for bacteria, food particles, and moisture. It could become a cosy habitat for lice. And without daily, vigorous washing with modern shampoo, a concept that didn't exist, it would inevitably begin to smell of old pipe tobacco, stale beer, and the general accumulated scents of the day. The natural filter was, in reality, more like a well-stocked terrarium for microbes, clinging just inches from your mouth and nose. But you don't know that. You give your moustache a final jaunty twist. You look in the mirror and see a picture of health, strength, and respectability. Your beard is your shield, your badge of honour, and the final piece of your morning armour. You are now fully prepared, from your detachable collar to your follicular face filter, to step out and face the day. Dressed and groomed, you finally make your way downstairs, the scent of your perfume and beard balm mingling with the house's persistent aroma of coal smoke and damp. Your destination is the kitchen, the pulsing, often chaotic heart of the Victorian home. It's a world away from the sterile stainless steel efficiency of a modern kitchen. This is a subterranean realm, usually located in the basement to keep heat and cooking smells away from the family's living quarters. The air is thick with the heat from the massive coal-fired cooking range, a black iron beast that must be constantly fed and tended. Your breakfast is simple enough, perhaps some porridge, toast and a boiled egg, but the journey those ingredients took to get to your plate is fraught with invisible dangers. You take a sip of milk, it tastes fine, but you have no way of knowing its true story. Milk was a notorious vector for disease. It was often produced in squalid urban dairies where cows were kept in filthy, cramped conditions. To make matters worse, it was almost always adulterated. Unscrupulous vendors would water it down to increase their profits, then add chalk or plaster dust to restore its white colour and thickness. Sometimes they would even add borax or formaldehyde as a preservative to keep it from souring on its long, unrefrigerated journey to your home. You are, in essence, drinking a chemical cocktail that might also be teeming with bacteria like tuberculosis or typhoid. Pasteurization would not become common practice until the very end of the century. You turn your attention to the bread. It looks like a hearty, wholesome loaf. But bread, too, was a frequent victim of adulteration. The most common and most dangerous additive was alum. Alum, a chemical salt, was used by bakers to make bread whiter, heavier, and appear to be of a higher quality than it was. It allowed them to use cheaper, lower-grade flour and still produce a visually appealing loaf. The problem is that alum is an astringent that is incredibly harsh on the digestive system, causing chronic constipation and other gastric distresses. It could be particularly harmful to children. That lovely slice of toast you're eating might be contributing to a host of internal problems you simply accept as a normal part of life. Even your tea isn't safe. The national beverage was subject to all sorts of fakery. Used tea leaves were bought from hotels and wealthy houses, re-dried, and then faced with a mixture of graphite, the same stuff in pencils, and other dyes to make them look like fresh, high-quality black tea. Sometimes leaves from other plants, like elder or hawthorn, were mixed in to bulk out the product. Particularly nasty practice in the production of green tea involved using a dye called Prussian blue, a compound containing cyanide to achieve the desired colour. A cup of tea wasn't just a comforting ritual, it was a game of Russian roulette with your insides. The Victorian era was the Wild West of food production. There were no meaningful regulations, no Food and Drug Administration, no labelling requirements. The guiding principle for many merchants was caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. This rampant adulteration was one of the first great public health crusades. The chemist Arthur Hill Hassall was a key figure, painstakingly analysing hundreds of food samples under his microscope and publishing the horrifying results in the medical journal, The Lancet, in the 1850s. His work, which revealed everything from red lead in cayenne pepper to copper in pickles, shocked the nation and led to the first tentative food safety laws. A truly quirky tidbit from this era of culinary anxiety is the invention of the oleomargarine detector. When margarine was invented in the 1860s as a cheap substitute for butter, it was met with suspicion. Enterprising inventors marketed small pocket-sized kits that supposedly allowed a consumer to test whether their butter was genuine or the manufactured imposter. These kits usually involved little more than a match and a small spoon. The way the substance burned or melted was meant to reveal its true identity. It was a perfect product for a paranoid public, desperate for some way to verify what they were eating. Historians still argue about the primary motivation behind the push for food purity laws. Was it genuinely a public health movement driven by a desire to protect the population from harm? Or was it also an effort by legitimate large-scale manufacturers to squeeze out smaller, corner-cutting competitors and control the market? The answer, as with many Victorian reforms, is a complex mix of altruism and economic self-interest. The big brands that guaranteed purity could build consumer trust and dominate the industry, so you finish your breakfast oblivious to the microscopic dangers you've just ingested. The kitchen itself is a source of constant risk. The coal range belches fumes. The larder, a cool pantry, is your only form of refrigeration, and it's a constant battle against mould and pests. Cross-contamination is a given. The same wooden board used to chop raw meat might be used for vegetables a moment later. The water you use for cooking and cleaning comes from a cistern that could be contaminated. You live with a low-grade, constant risk of food poisoning. A bit of indigestion, a sour stomach, these are just background noise, the body's regular protest against the daily onslaught of adulterated food and invisible bacteria. The true miracle of Victorian life wasn't just surviving the streets, it was surviving your own dinner table. Having navigated the treacherous landscape of your breakfast, the call of nature, a more urgent one this time, returns. Your morning visit to the chamber pot under the bed was a temporary measure. Now, a more permanent solution is required. You excuse yourself from the breakfast table and face one of the great domestic dilemmas of the mid to late Victorian era. Do you brave the journey to the outdoor privy, or do you place your trust in the new and often temperamental indoor water closet? Let's consider your first option, the privy. You walk through the scullery at the back of the house and step out into the small, damp yard. The air is chilly and smells of wet earth and coal smoke. There, at the far end of the garden, stands a small shed-like structure, often discreetly hidden behind some shrubbery. This is the privy, or the necessary house. You trudge across the muddy ground, your shoes squelching slightly. You open the wooden door with a creak and are greeted by a familiar, powerful smell and a profound, shadowy gloom. The interior is Spartan. It's a small, unheated box containing a simple wooden bench with 1 or 2 holes cut into it. Below the bench is a deep pit, or in a slightly more advanced setup, a removable pail. This is the cesspit system. All the household's waste accumulates here, slowly decomposing. The smell is potent. You try to breathe shallowly through your mouth. The air is cold, and sitting on the rough-sawn wooden seat is a genuinely bracing experience, especially in winter. It is a place of primal, unpleasant necessity. You do your business as quickly as possible, surrounded by darkness, cold, and the company of buzzing flies, even on a cool day. The contents of this cesspit would be emptied periodically, perhaps only once or twice a year, by men known as night soil men. They came, as their name suggests, in the dead of night, to shovel the accumulated waste into carts and haul it away to be sold as fertiliser to farmers on the outskirts of the city. It was a foul but essential job, a key part of the urban ecosystem. But between their visits, the cesspit would fill, becoming more and more pungent, and often leaching its contents into the surrounding soil, contaminating the very ground your house was built on, and, crucially, the local wells. But perhaps you are in a more modern, forward-thinking household. You have a water closet. This is a huge leap in domestic technology, a symbol of status and progress. It's a small dedicated room, a closet, inside the house, perhaps tucked away under the stairs. You enter, and before you is a porcelain bowl, often elaborately decorated with floral patterns or pastoral scenes, a strange juxtaposition of art and function. This is a flushing toilet. It seems like a miracle of convenience. No cold trip to the garden, no flies, no overwhelming smell. But these early water closets were notoriously unreliable. The most common type was the pan closet, which had a hinged pan at the bottom of the bowl that would tip to release the contents when you pulled the chain. The problem was the large unventilated container below the pan, where waste would collect before being flushed away. This container was a perfect factory for foul-smelling and potentially explosive sewer gases. These gases could then seep back up into the house through the toilet itself, bringing the dreaded miasma right into your home. It was believed this sewer gas could cause typhoid, diphtheria, and a host of other diseases. Plumbers and inventors spent decades trying to perfect the S-bend or trap, a simple U-shaped pipe that holds water and creates a seal, preventing gases from coming back up. It's a feature of every modern toilet, but in your time it was still a developing technology. So you use the water closet, pull the long brass chain, and listen. Will it work? Sometimes the flush is weak, failing to clear the bowl. Sometimes the mechanism clogs, requiring a bit of frantic, undignified jiggling of the handle. And sometimes it works perfectly, a satisfying whoosh of water carrying everything away to an unseen destination. A quirky and rather unpleasant feature of these early systems was their noise. The rush of water through the lead pipes could be thunderous, announcing your private activities to the entire household. It was a far cry from the quiet efficiency we expect today. Historians still argue about the true public health impact of the early water closet. On one hand, it moved human waste out of the backyard cesspit, a clear improvement. On the other hand, where did that waste go? It was flushed along with gallons of water, directly into the local river via a rudimentary drain. In a city like London, this meant thousands of toilets were dumping raw sewage directly into the Thames, the primary source of the city's drinking water. The water closet, for all its convenience, was a key contributor to massive waterborne epidemics like the cholera outbreaks of the mid-19th century. It solved a private problem by creating a catastrophic public one. So you face your choice: the privy, cold, smelly, but reliable in its awfulness, its waste contained mostly in one spot. Or the water closet, warm, convenient, a marvel of modern living that might be silently filling your home with noxious fumes or contributing to the poisoning of the entire city. There is no perfect option. Each is a compromise, a small daily negotiation with the fundamental messy realities of human existence in an era struggling to come to terms with its own filth. Having made your choice in the great privy versus water closet debate, you return to the relative warmth of the house. As you settle into a chair in the parlour to read the morning paper, you feel a familiar, annoying sensation, a tiny, persistent itch at the nape of your neck. You discreetly reach back and scratch, but it does little to satisfy. It's not a simple itch. It has a quality of movement, a tiny crawling feeling that makes the skin on your arms prickle with a primal sense of revulsion. You're not alone in your own clothes. This is a constant, unwelcome reality of Victorian life. You're in a never-ending war against a microscopic army of parasites that see your home, your clothes and your body as their personal paradise. These are your six-legged tenants who have decided to live with you rent-free and they are notoriously difficult to evict. Fleas, lice, and the dreaded bedbug were not just a problem for the poor and destitute, they were an infuriating fact of life for nearly everyone. Your first suspect for this neck itch is the louse. Head lice and body lice were endemic. Children brought them home from school, you could pick them up in a crowded omnibus, or they could transfer from a visitor's coat hanging next to yours. Later in the day, the woman of the house will likely have to perform a louse check. You will sit on a stool while she meticulously works through your hair with, say, a special fine-toothed knit comb, often made of bone or boxwood. The comb is scraped against the scalp, and with each pass it's inspected for the tiny translucent eggs, nits, or the dark specks of the adult insects. It is a slow, tedious and slightly humiliating ritual. The captured lice are then squashed between two thumbnails with a satisfying if grim little pop. Then there are the fleas. Your house may have a cat or a dog and they are living flea factories, but even without pets, fleas are everywhere. They thrive in the dusty woven carpets, in the straw or horsehair stuffing of your mattress, and in the cracks of the floorboards. You'll feel their presence as sharp, itchy bites around your ankles. At night, you might see them. Tiny black specks, hopping with incredible speed across the white bed sheets. People would set out shallow white dishes filled with water and a little turpentine, hoping the fleas would be attracted to the light-coloured surface, jump in and drown. It was a mostly futile gesture, catching a few dozen while thousands more continued to thrive in their plush woolen kingdoms. But the true king of the nocturnal parasites, the creature that inspired a unique kind of Victorian dread, was the bedbug. Cimex lectularius. Unlike fleas, they didn't just visit for a meal. They lived with you in your most vulnerable space, your bed. The ornate heavy wooden bed frames of the era, with their many joints, cracks and crevices, were ideal hiding places. During the day, they would retreat deep into the frame. But at night, drawn by the warmth and carbon dioxide of your breath, they would emerge to feed. You would wake in the morning with mysterious itchy welts, often in a telltale linear pattern of 3 bites, grimly referred to as breakfast, lunch and dinner. Fighting bedbugs was a desperate ongoing campaign. A common method was to regularly take the entire bed frame apart piece by piece and wash every joint with a strong solution of soap, turpentine, or even mercury chloride. A particularly quirky folk remedy, which has seen some modern scientific investigation, was to scatter fresh bean leaves on the floor around the bed. The leaves are covered in microscopic hooked hairs called trichomes, which would entangle the legs of the bedbugs, trapping them like natural flypaper. In the morning you would simply sweep up the leaf traps and burn them. Historians still argue whether the Victorians viewed common pests like lice with a sense of moral shame, or with a weary resignation to an unavoidable aspect of existence. While having a severe infestation was certainly associated with the squalor of the slums, private letters and diaries from the middle and upper classes reveal a constant low-level struggle. It seems it was an annoyance to be managed, a private battle to be fought, rather than a deep personal failing. The sheer ubiquity of the pests made complete eradication impossible for anyone. To fight this war, you had a small arsenal of chemical weapons. You could buy powders to sprinkle in your sheets or dust into the seams of your clothes. These were often advertised as miraculous and instantaneous pest destroyers. The active ingredient was frequently something alarmingly toxic, like pyrethrum powder, made from chrysanthemums, relatively safe. But just as often it was arsenic, sulphur or mercury. You would go to bed in sheets laced with a fine dusting of poison, hoping it would kill the bugs before it did you any serious harm. It's a bit like trying to get rid of mice by setting your own house on fire. So you sit in your chair, trying to ignore the itch. You are clean by Victorian standards. You've washed, you've perfumed, you've dressed in your layers, but you're still a walking ecosystem. The battle against dirt and disease is not just about what you can see and smell. It's about this invisible, crawling world that coexists with you. Later tonight, as you climb into your bed, you will do so with a faint sense of unease, listening for the faintest rustle, feeling for the slightest tickle, knowing that the moment you fall asleep, the nightly siege may begin anew. The morning rituals are complete, the pests have been pondered, but the great engine of Victorian hygiene, or the attempt at it, is just beginning to roar to life in the scullery. For 1 day a week, typically Monday, the entire household is turned upside down by a single monumental task, laundry day. This is not a matter of tossing a few things into a machine and walking away. This is an all-day, back-breaking, steam-filled ordeal that consumes fuel, water and human energy on a massive scale. If you are a man of the house, you will likely only experience it as a distant clamour and a pervasive, damp, soapy smell. But if you are a woman, or if you venture into the service areas of your home, you will witness a scene of controlled chaos. The scullery, a room adjacent to the kitchen, is filled with steam so thick it's hard to see from one end to the other. The air is hot and humid, and the floor is slick with water. This is women's work, and it is brutally physical. The process begins with the great copper, a massive cauldron made of copper, bricked into its own furnace. Early in the morning it was filled with water, and a fire was lit beneath it. Getting that much water to a boil takes hours and consumes a vast amount of coal or wood. While it heats, the clothes are sorted into piles, whites, coloureds, heavily soiled work clothes. Remember your weekly change of undergarments? They're in the heavily soiled pile along with the kitchen rags and stable clothes. Once the water is boiling, the first load, the whites, goes in. But not with a gentle, nicely scented detergent. The cleaning agent is harsh, homemade soap made from lye and leftover animal fats, or perhaps a block of hard soap that has to be shaved into the water. To get the whites truly white, soda crystals or even a caustic substance like lye might be added to the water. The clothes are then agitated in this boiling chemical-laced water, not by a machine but by a person wielding a long wooden stick or a tool called a dolly, a stool-like implement on a long pole that is used to pound and churn the fabrics. The steam billows scalding hot into the face of the washerwoman. After a good boiling and pounding, the clothes are lifted out of the copper with tongs, steaming and dangerously hot, and transferred to a large wooden washtub. Now comes the scrubbing. Each item is scrubbed by hand on a corrugated washboard, a ribbed surface of wood or later, galvanised metal. This is where the real muscle comes in. You lean over the tub, your knuckles raw, scrubbing every inch of fabric against the board to work out the ingrained dirt. Your back aches, your arms burn, and the harsh soap strips the oils from your skin, leaving your hands red and chapped. Once scrubbed, the clothes are rinsed. This means more tubs of water, cold water this time, that had to be hauled and carried. The clothes are plunged and agitated to remove the soap and grime. They might be rinsed 2 or 3 times to get them truly clean. Then comes the wringing. To get the water out, each item must be twisted by hand. A 2-person job for heavy items like sheets. You take one end, the other washerwoman takes the other, and you twist in opposite directions, squeezing out as much water as possible. Later in the century, a brilliant piece of technology, the mangle, would revolutionise this step. The mangle was a large device with 2 heavy rollers mounted in a frame. You fed the wet clothes between the rollers and turned a crank, which squeezed the water out with mechanical efficiency. Still, it was hard physical labour. For whites, there was one final step: bluing. A small amount of blue dye was added to the final rinse water. This was a quirky optical trick. The faint blue tint counteracted the natural yellowing of the fabric, making the whites appear brighter and whiter to the human eye. It didn't make them any cleaner, but it was a key part of the performance of cleanliness. Historians still argue about the social and economic impact of commercial laundries, which began to appear in the late 19th century. Were they a liberating force, freeing women from the weekly drudgery, or did they simply shift the exploitation to a different class of low-paid, overworked women in dangerous steam-filled factories? For a middle-class household, sending the laundry out became a new status symbol, a way of outsourcing the most grueling domestic task. Finally, the clothes must be dried. In good weather, they are hung on long lines in the garden, a flag day of billowing sheets and undergarments for all the neighbours to see. In the frequent rain and smog of a British city, they must be dried indoors, hung on wooden racks near the kitchen range, filling the house with a damp, clinging humidity for days and making the whole place smell like a laundromat. The sheer scale of this weekly undertaking is why clothes were worn for so long. When you understand that cleaning a single shirt involves boiling, pounding, scrubbing, rinsing, wringing and drying, a process that could take the better part of a day, you begin to see why changing your collar and cuffs was such an appealing shortcut. Laundry day was a domestic battle. It was a testament to the Victorian obsession with presentable appearances, an obsession that could only be satisfied through this Herculean and almost entirely female effort. You're sitting by the fire after dinner, reading a novel, when a familiar scratchiness begins in the back of your throat. A chill, unrelated to the drafts in the room, seems to creep up your spine. Your head feels heavy, and a dull ache begins to throb behind your eyes. You're falling ill. In the 21st century, this might mean a trip to the pharmacy for some over-the-counter remedies. In the Victorian home, it means you are now entering the domain of the woman of the house, the domestic nurse, and her arsenal of traditional home remedies. Before calling for a doctor, an expensive and often frightening prospect, the first line of defence is the household medical guide and the inherited wisdom of mothers and grandmothers. The mistress of the house, your wife or mother, becomes your primary caregiver. She might consult a popular book like Buchan's Domestic Medicine, or Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, which contain not just recipes for dinner, but also recipes for health. These books were filled with instructions for diagnosing common ailments and preparing a host of poultices, tinctures, and teas. For your sore throat and developing cough, a common treatment is a mustard plaster. She will mix powdered mustard with flour and a little water to create a thick paste. This is spread onto a piece of cloth and applied directly to your chest or back. The mustard acts as a counter-irritant. Its chemical compounds cause the skin to become red, hot, and slightly painful. The theory was that this external irritation would draw the sickness, the inflammation and congestion out from the deeper tissues of the lungs. You lie there with this pungent, warming plaster on your chest, the sharp smell of mustard filling your nostrils. It's an uncomfortable sensation, but the heat is strangely comforting, a feeling that something is being done. Next, she might prepare a cough syrup. This isn't a carefully formulated berry-flavoured liquid from a lab. It's a homemade concoction. A popular recipe involved boiling onions and brown sugar down to a thick, sweet syrup. The quercetin in onions does have some mild anti-inflammatory properties, but mostly you are just drinking hot sugar water. Another common ingredient for coughs was horehound, a bitter herb that was often made into a candy. These remedies were mostly harmless, if not particularly effective. However, the domestic medicine cabinet also contained more potent and more dangerous substances. If your cough becomes severe, she might reach for a bottle labelled paregoric. This was a camphorated tincture of opium, and it was a staple of the Victorian home. A small dose would indeed suppress a cough and help you sleep. The problem was its highly addictive nature. Many respectable Victorians, particularly women who used it for female complaints or to soothe fretful children, developed secret, lifelong opium addictions, all under the guise of domestic medicine. A popular product for teething babies, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, was famously loaded with morphine. It was very effective at quieting babies, sometimes permanently. As you lie in bed, feverish and miserable, the focus is on managing your symptoms and keeping you comfortable. You're encouraged to drink beef tea, a thin broth made from boiling down beef believed to be incredibly nourishing and restorative. The windows are likely to be sealed shut. Remember the miasma theory. Fresh air, especially night air, was considered dangerous, full of noxious vapours that could worsen your condition. So you are confined to a stuffy, warm room, breathing the same stale air over and over, which is of course the perfect environment for germs to multiply. A quirky and rather disgusting sounding remedy for a sore throat was the foul sock treatment. You would be instructed to wear a particularly dirty sock, one you had worn all day, tied around your neck overnight. The belief, rooted in folk magic, was that the sock's animal effluvia, polite term for the filth and sweat, contained potent healing properties that would draw the sickness out of your throat. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies were practiced with genuine belief or with a kind of desperate, what have we got to lose attitude. When scientific medicine had little to offer for common illnesses, turning to traditional and sometimes bizarre cures was the only option available. If your condition worsens, a doctor might be summoned. He will arrive with his black leather bag, bringing an air of grave authority into the sick room. He will feel your pulse, examine your tongue, and listen to your chest. His diagnosis will be based on the ancient theory of humours or the more current, but equally flawed miasma theory. His treatments might not be much of an improvement on the home remedies. He might prescribe a powerful emetic to make you vomit, or a purgative to violently empty your bowels, believing this will expel the disease from your body. Or he might resort to bloodletting, opening a vein to drain a specific quantity of blood to rebalance your system. For now, though, you are in the care of your domestic nurse. You sip your onion syrup, breathe in the fumes from your mustard plaster, and try to rest in the stuffy room. Your survival depends less on the efficacy of these treatments and more on the strength of your own immune system. You're caught in a strange world between folklore and emerging science, where a loving caregiver might offer you a comforting cup of beef tea with one hand and a dangerous opium tincture with the other. After a day or two confined to the stuffy sick room, you've recovered enough from your cold to venture outside. You feel a bit weak, but the prospect of fresh air, even the questionable fresh air of a Victorian city, seems appealing. You put on your coat and hat, step out of the front door, and are immediately hit by a full frontal sensory assault. The world outside your door is a chaotic, filthy, and overwhelmingly smelly place. Your first challenge is simply navigating the pavement, or what passes for it. The sidewalks are uneven, paved with flagstones that are often broken or missing, creating treacherous ankle traps for the unwary, but the real hazard is what covers them. A fine layer of black soot coats everything, a constant rain of particles from the thousands of chimneys belching coal smoke into the sky. This soot works its way into your clothes, your lungs, and stains the very stone of the buildings a gloomy, uniform grey. Then there is the mud, not the honest, earthy mud of a country lane, but a uniquely urban slime. It's a vile concoction of dirt, soot, spilled beer from the nearby pub, miscellaneous garbage, and above all horse manure. The Victorian city runs on horsepower. Thousands of horses, pulling carriages, omnibuses, delivery carts and drays, are the engines of transport and commerce, and each of these horses produces on average 20 to 30 pounds of manure and a gallon of urine to iron per day. Multiply that by the tens of and thousands of horses in a city like London or Manchester, and you have a sanitation crisis of staggering proportions. The streets are literally carpeted in horse droppings. In dry weather, it dries into a fine, foul-smelling dust that is kicked up by every passing wheel and gust of wind, coating your face and clothes. In wet weather, which is most of the time in Britain, it dissolves into a thick, pungent, liquid slurry that pools in the gutters and splatters onto your trousers and the hem of your skirt with every step. You learn to walk with a careful, strategic gait, navigating a path between the steaming piles of fresh manure and the treacherous, soupy puddles. This is why the profession of the crossing sweeper existed. At busy intersections, you'll see a ragged child or an impoverished adult with a broom, frantically sweeping a clean path through the mire for pedestrians. You are expected to toss them a halfpenny for this service, allowing you to cross the road without wading ankle-deep through a river of filth. It was a miserable, low-status job, but an essential one for anyone who wanted to maintain even a pretense of clean shoes. As you walk, your nose is bombarded by a symphony of odours. The dominant note is the sharp, ammonia-like smell of horse urine and manure. Layered on top of that is the sulphurous scent of coal smoke, the smell of rotting vegetables from a costermonger's cart, the yeasty smell of a nearby bakery, the chemical tang from a small workshop or factory, and the faint but pervasive smell of human waste wafting up from the sewer grates. You use the perfumed handkerchief you carry for just this purpose, holding it to your nose as you pass a particularly ripe-smelling alleyway. The noise is just as overwhelming. The clatter of iron-shod horses' hooves on cobblestones is deafening. The rumble of iron-rimmed cartwheels creates a constant grinding roar. Street vendors or criers shout to advertise their wares. Fresh oysters, knives to grind, who'll buy my lavender, each trying to be heard over the din. The soundscape of the Victorian city is a relentless jarring cacophony, a world without mufflers, rubber tyres or noise ordinances. A quirky but essential piece of street-level hygiene technology was the public boot scraper. Set into the stone by the front steps of most respectable houses was a small ornate iron bar. Before entering your own home or visiting another, you were expected to stop and vigorously scrape the accumulated layers of mud, manure and grime from the soles and sides of your boots. It was a simple but crucial barrier, an attempt to keep the filth of the street from invading the relative cleanliness of the home. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of this daily sensory overload. Did the constant exposure to filth and noise lead to a sort of desensitization, where people simply stopped noticing it? Or did it create a deep-seated anxiety about dirt and contamination, fueling the Victorian obsession with domestic cleanliness and private purity as a refuge from the public squalor? The evidence suggests both are true. People learn to function within the chaos, while simultaneously retreating into their homes as sanitized, heavily curtained fortresses against the hostile world outside. You continue your walk, carefully dodging a speeding hansom cab that sends a spray of brown liquid flying from its wheels. You see children playing in the gutter, making mud pies from a substance you'd rather not contemplate. You see a dog scavenging in a pile of refuse swept into the corner of the street. This is the reality of the urban environment you inhabit. It's a place of incredible energy and industry, but also of profound, inescapable filth. Your brief walk for fresh air has been a stark reminder that the battle for hygiene isn't just a personal or domestic struggle, it's a war against the very city you call home. As you continue your walk through the grimy, chaotic streets of London, you notice the smell of the river. It's a smell that's always there, a background note in the city's olfactory profile, but today it seems stronger. It's a warm day, the sun beating down and the scent rising from the Thames is not the salty, briny smell of a healthy waterway. It is a foul, gag-inducing stench of decay, an overwhelming miasma that seems to coat the back of your throat. You're living in the summer of 1858, a season that will go down in history as the year of the Great Stink. The River Thames, for centuries the lifeblood of London, has become its sewer. Every water closet you and your neighbours so proudly installed. Every rudimentary drain from every factory, hospital and slaughterhouse empties directly into the river. The river is not just polluted, it is a churning brown open cesspool, thick with raw sewage, industrial effluent and the carcasses of dead animals. The old cesspit system, for all its faults, at least contained the waste. The new water closets, celebrated as a mark of progress, have funneled the entire city's filth into its central artery, and in the unusually hot, dry summer of 1858, the consequences of this decision become catastrophic. The water level of the river drops, exposing vast banks of stinking, sewage-laden mud along the shores. The sun bakes this filth, accelerating its decomposition and releasing a plume of hydrogen sulfide and other gases so powerful, so profoundly offensive, that it brings the city to its knees. This isn't just an unpleasant smell, it is a physical presence. People living near the river are overcome with nausea and fainting spells. The stench is said to be strong enough to turn the pages of books in riverside libraries brown and to tarnish silver. Your walk takes you towards Westminster, the seat of government. Here, the situation is particularly dire. The magnificent new Houses of Parliament, a symbol of British imperial power, stand right on the riverbank, and the Great Stink is no respecter of persons. The politicians inside, the very men governing the largest empire on earth, are under siege from the foul air wafting in through the windows. They try to combat it. The curtains are soaked in chloride of lime, a bleaching and disinfecting agent, in a futile attempt to neutralise the smell. Letters are written on stationery that has to be perfumed to be bearable. Members of Parliament are seen rushing through the corridors holding scented handkerchiefs to their faces. One debate in the House of Commons is cut short when the stench becomes so unbearable that the members simply cannot continue. The prevailing miasma theory of disease turns this from a mere inconvenience into a terrifying public health crisis. If bad air causes disease, then the air rising from the Thames is surely the most poisonous imaginable. The city holds its breath, waiting for the inevitable outbreak of cholera, typhoid, or some new unnamed plague to sweep through the population. The smell is not just disgusting, it's believed to be deadly. A quirky but telling anecdote from this time involves the courts of law located at Westminster Hall. Judges and lawyers complained that the stink was so overpowering it was affecting their ability to think clearly and administer justice. There was a genuine fear that the nation's legal system would grind to a halt because of the smell. This immediate personal threat to the ruling class is what finally spurred them into action. For years, reformers had been pleading for a proper sewer system, but the cost and scale of the project were deemed too great. Now, with the Great Stink literally forcing its way into the halls of power, the debate is over. The government is forced to act, and act quickly. Historians still argue about the primary catalyst for this sudden political will. Was it the genuine fear of a miasma-induced epidemic that finally motivated Parliament? Or was it the simple, inescapable fact that their own workplace had become uninhabitable? The great Victorian cartoonist of the magazine Punch, John Tenniel, famously depicted Father Thames as a filthy skeletal monster rising from the river to haunt the city. This powerful imagery captured the public mood. The river was no longer a friend, but a monstrous enemy of their own making. The crisis atmosphere of the Great Stink creates a political hero, a civil engineer named Joseph Basil Jett. He had already drawn up plans for a revolutionary new sewer system, but they had been languishing in bureaucratic limbo. Now, in a matter of weeks, Parliament passes legislation empowering him to begin construction. The bill is rushed through with a speed that is almost comical, driven by sheer olfactory desperation. The politicians basically throw money at Bazalgette and tell him to fix the river, no matter the cost. You stand by the river, looking at the sluggish brown water, and you can see the problem with your own eyes. You can smell it with every breath you take. The Great Stink is a defining moment. It is the culmination of decades of haphazard growth, poor sanitation, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the consequences of flushing waste into the water supply. It is the moment when the city, choking on its own filth, is forced to confront the problem head-on. The air is foul, the future uncertain, but on the banks of this stinking river, public health revolution is about to be born, not from scientific foresight, but from a stench so powerful it could bring an empire to its senses. The memory of the Great Stink and the general ever-present griminess of city life creates a powerful desire for cleanliness. Your weekly ablutions at the washstand and your occasional chaotic full-body bath at home feel inadequate. You long for a proper soaking wash, a way to scrub off the layers of city soot and feel truly clean. If you are a member of the working class, or even a middle-class person seeking a more efficient way to bathe, you might turn to one of the great social innovations of the era, the public bathhouse. You make your way to a large, imposing brick building, often built in a grand, slightly municipal style with arched windows and a prominent clock tower. It doesn't look like a modern swimming pool or spa. It has the solid, slightly severe look of a library or a town hall. This is a public baths and wash house, a facility built by philanthropists or the local parish with the specific goal of improving the health and hygiene of the populace. You enter a clean, tiled lobby that smells strongly of carbolic soap and damp stone. A clerk sits behind a grill. Here, you pay your fee. The pricing is tiered, a perfect reflection of the Victorian class system. A first-class bath, which gets you a private room, a larger tub, 2 clean towels, and a mirror, might cost 6p. A second-class bath with a smaller room and only 1 towel might be 2p. And for the very poor, there was often a third-class option for a single penny, offering a simple bath with no amenities, sometimes with a time limit to ensure high turnover. You pay your 2p and are given a towel and a small piece of soap. You are then shown to your bathing compartment. It's a small private cubicle, closed off by a wooden door. Inside, it's Spartan but functional. The walls are whitewashed or tiled, the floor is stone or slate, and dominating the space is a large cast-iron bathtub. It's a simple utilitarian tub, not the elegant claw-footed variety you might see in a wealthy home. Next to it are 2 large taps, one for hot and one for cold. This, right here, is the miracle. Instant, abundant hot water. For someone whose experience of hot water involves hauling buckets from a kitchen fire, this is the height of luxury and convenience. You turn the stiff brass tap, and a gush of steaming hot water roars into the tub. You temper it with some cold undress in the privacy of your cubicle, and step in. The sensation is glorious. It's a deep, soaking heat that penetrates your muscles and seems to melt away weeks of accumulated grime. You can scrub yourself thoroughly from head to toe in a way that is simply impossible with a pitcher and basin. The soap is the same harsh carbolic stuff, but here, with an abundance of hot water, it feels powerfully effective. You can wash your hair, something that is a major messy operation at home, but is simple here. These bathhouses were born out of the sanitary movement, a reform campaign that linked dirt with disease and social decay. Reformers believed that providing access to cleanliness was not just a health issue, but a moral one. A clean body, they argued, would lead to a clean mind and a more orderly, sober and productive working class. The slogan "Cleanliness is next to godliness" was a driving force behind their construction. The first modern public bathhouse in Britain opened in Liverpool in 1842, and the idea quickly spread across the country, championed by social reformers and public health advocates. A quirky feature of many of these establishments was the attached public laundry, or wash house. While you were having your bath, your wife or a female family member could be in another part of the building, using the provided tubs, hot water, and mangles to do the week's laundry far more efficiently than at home. It was a one-stop shop for family hygiene. These wash houses became important social centres for working-class women, a place to gather, work and exchange news, away from the cramped conditions of their tenements. Historians still argue about the true impact of these bathhouses on public health. Did they significantly reduce the rates of infectious disease, or were they more of a social and psychological benefit? While they undoubtedly provided a much-needed service and improved personal hygiene for millions, their effect on epidemic diseases like cholera or typhoid was likely limited, as those were primarily spread by contaminated water, not unwashed bodies. The real victory was in tackling the diseases of filth and pests, skin infections, lice and scabies, and in giving people a sense of dignity and well-being. You soak in the tub until the water begins to cool. There might be a knock on the door from an attendant, letting you know your allotted time is up. You get out, dry yourself with the thin but clean towel, and get dressed. You feel transformed. Your skin tingles, you feel lighter, fresher, and profoundly cleaner than you have in weeks. You emerge from the bathhouse back into the grimy city street, but you feel as though you are carrying a small personal shield of cleanliness. The public bathhouse was a remarkable institution. It was a practical solution to a massive problem, a place where, for just a penny or two, an ordinary person could experience the simple, transformative luxury of a hot bath. It represented a crucial step forward in the public's understanding of hygiene, a recognition that cleanliness was not just a private virtue but a public good, worthy of investment and civic pride. Feeling renewed from your visit to the public bathhouse, you walk through the city with a new awareness. The clean feeling on your skin makes the filth of the streets seem even more pronounced. But as you walk, you notice something else. The city itself is undergoing a radical subterranean surgery. In great swathes of London, streets are being torn up, vast trenches are being dug, and armies of men, nicknamed navvies, are laying enormous brick pipes deep in the earth. You're witnessing the construction of Joseph Bazalgette's revolutionary sewer system, the direct, world-changing response to the Great Stink of 1858. This is not just a repair job, it's one of the most ambitious and visionary engineering projects of the 19th century. Joseph Bazalgette, the chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, is not just building a few new drains. He is designing and implementing a comprehensive interconnected network to intercept the entirety of London's sewage before it can reach the Thames. His plan is both simple in its concept and staggering in its scale. He is building massive interceptor sewers, running parallel to the river on both the north and south banks. These enormous tunnels are designed to catch the flow from all the existing local sewers, which currently dump straight into the river, and channel it far eastward, downstream of the city. You pause to watch the work. It is a scene of incredible raw labour. Men are deep in the trenches, their bodies covered in mud and clay. They are digging by hand with picks and shovels, working by the dim, flickering light of gas lamps. You see steam-powered cranes lifting massive buckets of earth out of the ground. You hear the rhythmic clang of hammers on metal and the shouts of the foreman. These navvies are the unsung heroes of this revolution. Strong, hard-drinking men who move from one great Victorian construction project to the next, building the canals, the railways, and now, the very foundations of public health. The engineering brilliance is everywhere. Bazalgette's motto was double the population and give them all a water closet. So he designed the tunnels to be far larger than what was currently needed, a decision that has allowed the system to continue functioning well into the 21st century. The tunnels are not just big, they are beautiful in their own way. They are architectural masterpieces of brickwork, with graceful sweeping curves and arches, all hidden beneath the ground. Bazalgette insisted on using the highest quality Portland cement, a relatively new material that was exceptionally strong and water resistant. Its strength was famously tested when a building collapsed onto one of the newly laid sewer lines. The sewer remained intact. One of the most wonderfully quirky and ingenious parts of the system was its reliance on gravity. Bazalgette meticulously calculated the gradients of the tunnels, giving them a precise fall of 2 feet per mile. This was the perfect gradient to ensure the sewage would flow at a steady pace of about 1.5 miles per hour, fast enough to carry away solid waste without leaving deposits, but not so fast that it would cause excessive wear and tear on the brickwork. It was a self-cleaning system powered by nothing more than the gentle, persistent pull of the earth. Of course, not all of London could be served by gravity alone. In low-lying areas like Chelsea and Pimlico, the sewage had to be lifted. For this, Bazalgette designed and built magnificent pumping stations. These weren't just utilitarian sheds, they were cathedrals of industry. Places like the Abbey Mills pumping station were built in a lavish Byzantine style, with ornate ironwork, polished brass and soaring decorated chimneys. They were nicknamed the Cathedrals of Sewage. This grand architecture served a dual purpose. It was a statement of civic pride in this monumental achievement, and it also helped to reassure a sceptical public that this new, expensive system was a worthy, permanent and noble endeavour. Historians still argue about the primary motivation for this grand architectural style. Was Bazalgette a genuine aesthete who believed that even functional infrastructure should be beautiful? Or was it a savvy political move to make the massive expenditure on the project more palatable to the public and to politicians, cloaking the dirty business of sewage in the respectable grandeur of high art? It was likely a bit of both, a perfect marriage of Victorian practicality and pomposity. The project is immense. It involves over 100 miles of New Street sewers feeding into 82 miles of main interceptor sewers, moving hundreds of millions of gallons of waste per day. The sewage is channeled to outfalls at Beckton on the north bank and Crossness on the south, where it is held in massive reservoirs and then released into the Thames on the ebb tide to be carried far out to sea. The effect on the river within London is almost immediate. By the mid-1860s, the Thames is cleaner than it has been in centuries. Fish begin to return. The great stink becomes a foul memory. As you turn away from the construction site and continue your walk, you are walking on top of a hidden revolution. Bazalgette's system is a triumph of sanitary engineering. It is a testament to foresight, meticulous planning and the sheer brute force of Victorian industry. It would, in the coming years, do more to save lives than any doctor or hospital of the era, dramatically reducing the incidence of waterborne disease. You are witnessing the creation of the invisible, silent infrastructure that will make the modern, healthy city possible. The battle against filth is being won, not with a scrubbing brush or a bar of soap, but with millions of bricks, rivers of cement, and the quiet genius of a man who knew how to make gravity do his bidding. The grand construction of Bazalgette's new sewer system fills you with a sense of optimism. Progress is being made, the city is being cleaned from the inside out, but the revolution beneath the streets hasn't reached every corner of London yet, and the old dangers still lurk, often in the most familiar and trusted of places. One sweltering afternoon, feeling thirsty, you stop at a public water pump, a common feature in many neighbourhoods. It's a sturdy cast-iron pump with a long handle, a source of free, cool water for the local community. You watch as a woman fills her bucket. A child takes a long drink directly from the spout. When it's your turn, you pump the handle and quench your thirst with the refreshing clear water. You have no idea that you may have just drunk a death sentence. This is the story of the Broad Street pump and the cholera outbreak of 1854, a medical detective story that would change the world. Cholera was the great terror of the 19th century city. It was a swift and brutal disease. One moment a person could be perfectly healthy. Hours later they would be in the throes of violent vomiting and diarrhoea, their body rapidly dehydrating, their skin turning a frightening bluish grey. Death could come within 24 hours, and no one knew what caused it. The prevailing theory, of course, was miasma. It was believed the disease was carried in the foul air, the stinking fogs that rose from the slums and the river. In August of 1854, a devastating cholera outbreak erupted in the Soho district of London. The disease spread with terrifying speed. In the space of just 10 days, over 500 people died within a few blocks. The residents were panicked. They fled their homes, but the deaths continued. The medical establishment was helpless, their miasma theory offering no explanation for why one side of a street might be decimated, while the other remained untouched. Enter Dr. John Snow, a physician who had long been a skeptic of the miasma theory. He had a different, deeply unpopular idea. He believed cholera was not airborne but was ingested, spread through contaminated food or most likely water. The Soho outbreak provided him with a grim opportunity to test his hypothesis. He began to investigate, not with a microscope but with a map. He went from house to house, meticulously recording each death and marking its location on a street plan of the neighbourhood. As he mapped the fatalities, a clear and horrifying pattern emerged. The deaths were clustered, with the highest concentration centred directly around the public water pump on Broad Street. There were anomalies, but Snow investigated each one. He found a workhouse near the epicentre that had very few deaths. He discovered it had its own private well and didn't use the Broad Street pump. He investigated a distant widow who died of cholera but lived miles away. He learned that she loved the taste of the Broad Street water so much that she had a bottle of it delivered to her home every day. Conversely, the workers at a local brewery all survived. They were given a daily ration of beer and never drank water from the pump. The evidence was overwhelming. The pump was the source. Armed with his map and his data, Snow went to the local Board of Guardians, the parish authorities. He presented his findings, arguing that the pump handle should be removed to prevent more people from drinking the contaminated water. The board was sceptical. His theory flew in the face of all established medical wisdom. How could a clear, tasteless glass of water be a deadly poison? A quirky detail of the event is that the board agreed to remove the pump handle not because they fully believed Snow's theory, but more as a precautionary measure. It seemed like something, anything, should be done. On September 8, 1854, the handle of the Broad Street pump was removed. The outbreak, which had already begun to wane as people fled the area, soon ended. Historians still argue about the immediate impact of Snow's work. While the removal of the pump handle has become a legendary moment in public health history, the medical establishment remained largely unconvinced for years. Snow's germ theory of disease was still a fringe idea, and the miasma theory was deeply entrenched. It wasn't until the later work of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch, who could actually see the cholera vibrio bacterium under a microscope, that Snow was fully vindicated. And what was the source of the contamination? A later investigation revealed the chilling truth. The well of the Broad Street pump had been dug just a few feet away from an old cesspit. The cesspit belonged to a house where a baby had contracted cholera from another source and died at the beginning of the outbreak. The baby's soiled diapers had been emptied into the cesspit, and its leaky brick lining allowed the cholera-laced sewage to seep into the well water. Every pull of the pump handle was delivering a diluted dose of the baby's feces to the neighbourhood. So as you wipe your mouth, feeling refreshed by the cool water from a similar public pump, you are participating in a lethal lottery. You are trusting in a public utility that could be a source of life or a vector of horrific disease. The story of the Broad Street pump is a stark reminder that the most significant threats to Victorian hygiene were often invisible, hiding in plain sight, in the clearest glass of water. It was a pivotal moment, shifting the focus from the smell of the air to the unseen contents of the water, a crucial step on the long road to understanding the true nature of contagion. You finish your drink from the pump, blissfully unaware of the microscopic gamble you've just taken, and turn your attention to the sounds of the street. Amidst the clatter of hooves and the shouts of vendors, you hear the high-pitched laughter of children. In a nearby alleyway, a group of them are playing. For a moment, it's a charming, picturesque scene. But as you look closer, you realise that childhood in the Victorian city is a life lived on the front lines of the war against filth, and the children themselves are often the most vulnerable casualties. They are not playing in a manicured park or a soft play surface playground. They are playing in the gutter, their bare feet splashing in the same dubious liquid you so carefully avoided earlier. Their playground is the alleys as the street, the grimy courtyard of a tenement building. Their toys are not brightly coloured, safety-tested plastic. They are ingenious and often dangerous, creations of their own making or the products of an unregulated industry. A little girl might be cradling a doll with a beautifully painted porcelain face. That paint is likely lead-based, and the common childhood habit of kissing the doll goodnight could lead to a slow, cumulative poisoning. The boys are sailing a small wooden boat in a puddle whose contents are an unspeakable mix of rainwater, horse urine, and whatever else has been washed into the street. Their most prized possessions might be marbles, but not the glass ones we know. Cheaper marbles were made of clay, and children would often hold them in their mouths for safekeeping during a game, ingesting whatever dirt and bacteria were clinging to them. They make mud pies, not from clean soil, but from the thick, black, manure-laced muck of the street. To a modern eye, it's a horror show of potential infections. To them, it's simply play. The home environment is no safer. You might see a toddler crawling on a floor covered by a carpet. That carpet could be dyed a brilliant, fashionable green. The most popular green dye of the era, Shields green, was made with arsenic. As the carpet wore down, microscopic particles of arsenic-laced dust would be released into the air, to be inhaled by the family. It was particularly dangerous for children, who spent much of their time playing on the floor. Doctors noted a mysterious wasting sickness in children from well-to-do homes, never suspecting that the beautiful green wallpaper or the vibrant carpet in the nursery was slowly killing them. Even their sweets are a source of peril. Candies are brightly, luridly coloured to attract a child's eye. Those colours are not harmless food dyes. The vibrant reds were often achieved with red lead, the yellows with lead chromate, and the greens again with copper arsenite. A child enjoying a piece of cheap candy from a corner shop was essentially eating a cocktail of heavy metals and poison. This hidden danger in everyday items is a recurring theme of Victorian life, a constant, invisible threat that people were only just beginning to understand. A particularly quirky and sad tidbit from the era is the market for soothing products for teething babies. We've already mentioned the infamous Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup laced with morphine, but there were also teething necklaces made from beads of henbane, a toxic plant, and various rubber or ivory rings. The problem was that even these seemingly harmless rings were often handled with unwashed hands and dropped onto filthy floors, becoming perfect vehicles for transmitting germs directly into a baby's mouth. Historians still argue about the Victorian perception of childhood mortality. With child death rates so tragically high, in some urban areas, as many as 1 in 3 children died before the age of 5, did parents become hardened to the loss, viewing it as an inevitable part of life? Or did the constant threat of death make the love for their children even more intense and precious? The sentimental art and literature of the period, with its frequent and heart-wrenching depictions of dying children, suggests the latter. The high mortality rate did not lead to callousness, but to a culture steeped in the anxiety and grief of childhood loss. It was a grief that was all too common. These children, playing in the filth, are surrounded by diseases that have now been almost eradicated in the developed world. Diphtheria, scarlet fever, measles, whooping cough, these were the common killers of Victorian childhood. A simple sore throat could rapidly escalate into a life-threatening airway obstruction. A fever and a rash could be the first signs of a fatal illness. Without antibiotics, a small cut from a fall on the cobblestones could become infected and lead to sepsis and death. You watch them play, their faces smudged with dirt, their clothes torn and stained. They are resilient, energetic, and seemingly oblivious to the dangers that surround them. They have an immunity that has been hard-won. Those who survive to this age have already weathered countless exposures to pathogens that would lay a modern adult low. But their play is a high-wire act, performed without a safety net, over a pit of infection and invisible poisons. Their laughter, ringing through the grimy alley, is both a sound of joy and a testament to the brutal lottery of survival that constituted a Victorian childhood. Your walk takes you past a large, imposing building, its brickwork stained a familiar sooty grey. This is the local hospital. A cart is pulled up outside and 2 men are carefully helping another man, his leg wrapped in bloody rags, out of the back. You shudder. If the home is a place of questionable remedies and the street a playground of germs, the hospital is a place you enter only out of absolute life-or-death desperation. For much of the Victorian era, a hospital was not seen as a place of healing, but as a gateway to the grave. You have a brief, terrifying vision of what it would be like inside. You're carried through the doors and immediately hit by a smell that makes the great stink seem pleasant by comparison. It is the smell of hospitalism, a unique and horrifying bouquet of unwashed bodies, infected wounds, carbolic acid, and death. The wards are vast, long rooms, crammed with dozens of beds placed far too close together. The air is stagnant. The windows often kept closed to keep out the dreaded miasma. You are placed on a bed with a thin, lumpy mattress and sheets that may or may not have been changed since the last patient, who likely died in this very spot. You look around at your fellow patients. Some are groaning in pain, others are delirious with fever, and some lie unnervingly still. The nurses, often untrained women from the lower classes, this is before the reforms of Florence Nightingale made nursing a respectable profession, move through the ward with a weary resignation. Their primary job is not to provide medical care, but to keep the patients fed and to clear away the dead. Now imagine your injury requires surgery. You are taken not to a sterile, gleaming operating theatre, but to a room that looks more like a butcher's shop. It might be an amphitheatre, with rows of seats for medical students to observe the spectacle. In the centre of the room is a simple wooden table, stained dark with the blood of countless previous operations. There are no surgical lights, just the dim light from a large window. The surgeon enters. He is a man of high status, often dressed in his fine street clothes. He does not scrub in. He might roll up his sleeves, but he will wear the same coat he wore on his rounds. a coat stiff and blackened with the dried blood and pus of past surgeries, a gruesome badge of honour signifying his vast experience. He selects his instruments from a velvet-lined case. They are wiped clean with a rag, but they are not sterilised. The concept of microbial contamination is unknown. You are given an anaesthetic, perhaps a chloroform-soaked rag held over your face. As you drift into unconsciousness, you are spared the agony of the knife, a mercy that is one of the great advances of the age. But this mercy comes with a hidden curse. Anaesthesia allows the surgeon to be more ambitious, to attempt longer, more invasive procedures that would have been impossible on a conscious patient. It opens up the body to deeper and more prolonged exposure to the septic environment of the operating room. The surgery proceeds with a grim, practiced haste. Speed is still considered a mark of a great surgeon, a holdover from the pre-anaesthetic days. Blood splatters, bone saws grind, and the surgeon works with a focused intensity. After he is finished, your wound is stitched up with ordinary silk thread and bandaged with linen dressings that are clean, but not sterile. You are then wheeled back to the ward to recover, and this is where the real battle begins. The surgery might have been a technical success, but now you must survive the inevitable infection. In the days that follow, your wound becomes hot, swollen, and begins to seep a thick yellow pus. This was so common it was considered a normal, even desirable part of the healing process. Surgeons spoke of laudable pus, believing it was a sign that the body was expelling its ill humours. In reality, it was a sign of a raging bacterial infection, very often gangrene, sepsis or erysipelas, which swept through hospital wards like wildfire. The mortality rate from post-operative infection was astronomical, in some hospitals approaching 50% or more for major amputations. A quirky and macabre detail of this surgical world was the operating hook. Before anaesthesia, patients undergoing surgery had to be physically restrained. Some operating tables were fitted with hooks and straps for this purpose. Even more grimly, some surgeons kept a personal hook on a chain, which an assistant could use to hook into a patient's jaw or limb to hold them steady during a procedure. It's a testament to the sheer brutality of surgery before the blessed relief of unconsciousness became standard. Historians still argue about Florence Nightingale's true contribution to medical science. While she is popularly remembered as the gentle lady with the lamp, her greatest impact was as a brilliant statistician and a fierce advocate for sanitarian principles. She famously demonstrated that in the Crimean War, far more soldiers were dying from disease in the filthy field hospitals than from their battle wounds. She didn't understand germ theory, but she understood the link between filth and death. Her insistence on fresh air, clean linens, scrubbed floors, and nutritious food dramatically lowered mortality rates and revolutionised the very concept of what a hospital should be. But as you stand outside the hospital, that revolution is still in its infancy. The building before you is a place of profound fear. It represents the failure of domestic medicine, the last resort of the desperate. You would have to be on the verge of death to willingly enter its doors, knowing that the surgeon's knife, even if it saved you from your initial ailment, might only be delivering you to a slower, more agonising death from the invisible enemies that thrived within its walls. The terrifying reality of the pre-Lister hospital, a place where survival was a matter of sheer luck, begins to change thanks to the work of a few brilliant, observant minds. You are now witnessing one of the most profound paradigm shifts in the history of science and medicine. The vague, shadowy fear of miasma is about to be replaced by a new and far more specific enemy, the germ. This is the moment when humanity begins to understand that the greatest threats to its health are not bad smells or imbalances of humours, but an invisible world of microscopic organisms. The story begins not in a hospital, but in the world of French industry. Louis Pasteur, a chemist, is asked to investigate why beer and wine are spoiling. Through his microscope, he discovers that the spoilage is caused by tiny living microorganisms, yeast and bacteria. He proves that by heating the liquid, a process that will become known as pasteurization, he can kill these organisms and prevent the spoilage. This is a revelation. If these invisible microbes can cause such dramatic effects in wine, what could they be doing inside the human body? Pasteur's work lays the foundation for the revolutionary idea that microorganisms are the cause of many diseases. This idea travels across the English Channel to a Scottish surgeon named Joseph Lister, working in the Glasgow Royal Infirmary. Lister is haunted by the appalling death rates in his surgical wards. He performs brilliant operations, only to see his patients die days later from what was called ward fever, or sepsis. He reads Pasteur's work and has a flash of insight. He hypothesizes that the same kind of microbes causing wine to spoil are causing the putrefaction he sees in his patients' wounds. The germs are not spontaneously generating inside the wound. They are being introduced from the outside, from the air. The instruments, the surgeon's hands. Lister needs a weapon to fight these invisible invaders. He learns about the use of carbolic acid, a derivative of coal tar, to treat sewage and to disinfect farm fields. He reasons that if it can kill the germs in sewage, perhaps it can kill the germs in a wound. In 1865, he tries it for the first time on a young boy with a severe compound fracture of the leg, an injury that was almost always fatal due to infection. Instead of amputating, Lister sets the bone and then applies dressings soaked in a dilute solution of carbolic acid. He instructs that the dressings be changed regularly. To the astonishment of his colleagues, the boy's wound heals cleanly, without any sign of the dreaded putrefaction. The boy walks out of the hospital. This is the dawn of antiseptic surgery. Lister begins to formalise his methods. He develops a carbolic acid spray, a large, cumbersome device that is used to create a mist of antiseptic over the operating table, intended to kill the germs in the air. He insists that instruments be soaked in carbolic solution and that surgeons wash their hands in it before operating. The results are staggering. The mortality rate on his ward plummets, but his ideas are met with fierce resistance. The medical establishment is deeply conservative. Surgeons, proud of their blood-stained coats, scoff at the idea that they should wash their hands. The carbolic spray is messy and unpleasant, irritating the skin and lungs of everyone in the operating room. The whole concept of invisible germs seems fanciful, an affront to the common sense of experienced practitioners. Lister is mocked and dismissed by many of his peers. A quirky detail of this resistance is that many surgeons simply couldn't believe that something they couldn't see, smell, or touch could be so deadly. The very invisibility of germs made them seem unreal. Historians still argue about the speed at which Lister's antiseptic principles were adopted. While he published his findings in 1867, it took decades for them to become standard practice. Was the slow adoption due to pure scientific conservatism, professional jealousy, or the practical difficulties and unpleasantness of the carbolic acid method? It seems to be a combination of all three. It wasn't until the work of German bacteriologist Robert Koch in the 1880s, who managed to isolate the specific bacteria that caused diseases like anthrax and tuberculosis, that germ theory became undeniable. Koch provided the visual proof that Lister's theory was correct. The shift from antiseptic to aseptic surgery is the next logical step. Instead of trying to kill germs in the operating room, antiseptic, the goal becomes preventing them from getting there in the first place, aseptic. This leads to the introduction of surgical gloves initially invented to protect a nurse's hands from the harsh carbolic acid, sterile gowns, face masks, and the sterilisation of instruments using high-pressure steam in a device called an autoclave. The operating theatre is transformed from a bloody spectacle into a pristine, white-tiled sanctuary of sterility. You are living through this momentous transition. The knowledge is spreading slowly but surely. The old surgeon with his filthy coat is gradually being replaced by a new generation of doctors who understand that their greatest enemy is an invisible one. The simple act of washing hands, once seen as an eccentric affectation, is becoming the most fundamental rule of medicine. The work of Pasteur and Lister represents a profound break with millennia of medical tradition. It is the single most important leap in hygiene, the moment when science finally provides the tools to win the war against infection, transforming the hospital from a house of death into a place of hope and genuine healing. While visionary minds like Joseph Lister are beginning to wage a sophisticated war on the microscopic level, another, broader battle is being fought on the streets around you. This one is not waged with a scalpel or a microscope, but with survey maps, government reports, and the wrecking ball. You are witnessing the age of the sanitarian, a powerful movement of reformers who are convinced that the key to public health lies not in killing invisible germs, but in vanquishing a much more tangible enemy, filth itself and the evil smells it produces. Long before germ theory was accepted, and even as it struggled for recognition, the sanitarian movement was driven by the powerful and persuasive logic of miasma. To them, the world was simple. Rotting matter, garbage, sewage, unwashed bodies, released a noxious vapour, a miasma, into the air. To inhale this bad air was to become sick. Therefore, the path to health was to eliminate the source of the stink. They were, in essence, trying to air out the entire city as if it were a teenager's bedroom. Their fight was not against bacteria, it was against the stench. The undisputed general in this war on smell was a man named Edwin Chadwick. He was not a doctor, but a lawyer and a tireless, famously abrasive social reformer. In 1842, he unleashed a bombshell on a British society, his report on the sanitary condition of the labouring population of Great Britain. This was not a dry academic paper. It was a massive, detailed and horrifying account of the squalor in which the majority of the urban poor lived. Chadwick's teams of investigators had gone into the slums, the tenements, the stinking courts and alleyways, and documented everything. The overflowing cesspits and cellars, the complete lack of drainage, the families crammed into single, unventilated rooms, the piles of rotting garbage in the streets. Following these reformers, you venture into one of these districts, a rookery, as it's called. The air immediately becomes thick and heavy, a palpable thing that you feel on your skin and taste at the back of your throat. The buildings are packed so tightly together that direct sunlight rarely reaches the ground. You enter a tenement building and are plunged into a gloomy darkness, the air smelling of damp, decay and too many people. You see a dozen people living in a single room, which they use for cooking, eating, sleeping and working. There is no running water. A single privy in the courtyard, or worse, the cellar, serves the entire building and is overflowing. This, to the sanitarians, is a fever nest, a factory producing a constant cloud of disease-laden miasma that threatens not only its inhabitants, but the entire city. Chadwick and his fellow sanitarians believed the solution was a full-scale assault. Their recommendations were radical. They called for the demolition of the worst slums, the creation of wider streets to allow air and sunlight to circulate, the establishment of municipal services for garbage removal, and, crucially, the construction of efficient sewer systems to carry away the foul-smelling waste. They were right about the solutions, but for the wrong reasons. They championed Bazalgette sewers not because they knew it would prevent cholera from contaminating the water supply, but because it would get the smelly sewage out of the city. This obsession with airflow led to some quirky inventions. You might see a strange little metal flap built into the wall near the ceiling of a room, connected to the chimney flue. This is an Arnott valve, a popular ventilation device designed to draw the vitiated, or used air out of a room and send it up the chimney, allowing fresh air to enter. The sanitarians were fanatical about ventilation, seeing it as the primary weapon against miasma. They advocated for every room, from the hospital ward to the private parlour, to have a constant circulating supply of fresh air. Historians still argue about the true motivations behind the sanitarian movement. Was it a purely benevolent crusade, driven by a humanitarian desire to improve the lives of the poor? Or was it also fueled by a deep-seated middle-class fear? The sanitarians' reports often emphasised the way that miasma could drift out of the slums and into the respectable squares and crescents, bringing disease to the wealthy. Cleaning up the slums in this view was an act of self-preservation. Furthermore, some see it as an exercise in social control, an attempt to impose middle-class values of order, cleanliness and sobriety onto a working-class population perceived as chaotic and undisciplined. It was perhaps a bit of all three. The sanitarians were the blunt instrument of public health reform. They were pragmatists, engineers and bureaucrats. Chadwick himself was famously difficult, a man who would probably write a multi-page report on the inefficiencies of your personal tea-making process if given the chance. He and his followers didn't have the elegant, precise theory of Pasteur or Lister. They were simply disgusted by the filth and squalor they saw, and they were determined to clean it up. And in doing so, they inadvertently destroyed the breeding grounds for the very germs they didn't believe in. By paving streets, collecting garbage, and letting in the light, they fought a winning battle against tuberculosis, typhus, and a host of other diseases that thrived in darkness and dirt. They may have been aiming at a phantom, but their arrows were hitting a very real target. You've seen the grand public battles against filth, the sewers, the bathhouses, the slum clearances, but the fight for health also takes place on a much more personal and far more deceptive level. You pick up the daily newspaper and there, nestled between news of the empire and shipping schedules, are the advertisements. They promise miracle cures for every ailment imaginable, from baldness to consumption, from nervousness to female weakness. You're looking at the golden age of patent medicines. These remedies are not sold in pharmacies with a doctor's prescription. They are sold by grocers, by mail order, and by travelling salesmen. Their packaging is a work of art with elaborate engravings, bold typography and dramatic names. Dr. Kilmer's Swamp Root, Hamlin's Wizard Oil, Lydia E. Pinkham's Vegetable Compound. The ads are filled with glowing emotional testimonials from satisfied customers who were at death's door until they discovered this one miraculous product. For a population racked with anxiety about health, living with countless chronic aches, pains and ailments for which mainstream medicine had no cure, these promises were powerfully seductive. You are feeling a bit run down, still recovering from your cold, perhaps a little stressed by the noise and grime of the city. An advertisement for a product called a restorative tonic catches your eye. It promises to invigorate the system, calm the nerves and restore youthful vitality. It sounds perfect. You buy a bottle. The liquid inside is dark and syrupy with a bitter herbal taste. You take a spoonful as directed, and within 20 minutes, a pleasant, warm calm spreads through your body. The aches seem to fade, your worries recede, and you feel wonderful. You've just discovered the secret ingredient in a vast number of Victorian patent medicines: narcotics. Your restorative tonic is likely a soothing blend of alcohol and opium. Many of the most popular soothing syrups for children, as we've seen, were laced with morphine. The explosion in popularity of cocaine in the 1880s led to a whole new class of products. There were cocaine-laced toothache drops that instantly numbed the pain. There were invigorating wines, like Vin Mariani, which was a popular Bordeaux wine treated with coca leaves, a favourite beverage of popes and queens. There were even cocaine tablets and throat lozenges advertised as a perfect pick-me-up for singers, teachers, and anyone who needed a little boost of energy and confidence. These products existed in a complete regulatory vacuum. Manufacturers were not required to list their ingredients, nor to prove that their products were safe or effective. They could make any claim they wanted. The secret formula was a key part of the marketing, suggesting some ancient hidden knowledge. In reality, the secret was usually a dangerously high concentration of alcohol, opium, morphine or cocaine, mixed with some inert, harmless-sounding botanicals to give it the air of a natural vegetable compound. A particularly quirky and bizarre category of patent medicine was the electric device. You might see ads for electric corsets, electric hairbrushes, or electric belts. These were not battery-powered devices. They usually contained plates of two different metals, like zinc and copper. When exposed to the slight moisture and acidity of the skin, they would generate a tiny, almost imperceptible electric current. The claim was that this electric force would cure everything from kidney disease to paralysis by revitalizing the body's natural energies. It was pure quackery, but it capitalized on the public's fascination with the new and mysterious force of electricity. It sounded scientific and modern, a perfect sales pitch for a gullible audience. Historians still argue about the level of public awareness regarding the addictive nature of these medicines. While the dangers of overt opium addiction were known, did the average person understand that the soothing effects of their favourite daily tonic were the first step on the same path? The language used in the advertisements was deliberately evasive, speaking of calming the nerves or providing rest. Many people, especially women confined to the home and suffering from a range of undiagnosed ailments often dismissed as hysteria, became unwittingly addicted. They were not seeking a high, they were seeking relief, and the patent medicine industry was all too happy to provide it in a bottle, no questions asked. The eventual backlash against this industry was a key part of the progressive era reforms in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Muckraking journalists began to expose the fraudulent claims and dangerous ingredients. Samuel Hopkins Adams's series The Great American Fraud, published in Collier's Weekly in 1905, was particularly influential. He sent samples of popular medicines to chemists for analysis and published the results, revealing the shocking truth about the narcotic content and the bogus claims. This public outcry led directly to the passage of landmark legislation like the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 in the United States, which for the first time required accurate labelling of ingredients. But for now, as you take another spoonful of your tonic, you're an unwitting participant in this great deception. You feel better, but it is the fleeting, treacherous comfort of a narcotic, not the genuine result of healing. The patent medicine bottle on your shelf represents a different kind of Victorian filth. Not the filth of the streets, but the moral filth of an industry that preyed on fear and desperation, selling addiction disguised as a cure. You'll walk through the city, A journey through its various states of hygiene and squalor now takes you past one of the most feared buildings of all, the workhouse. It's a large, grim, fortress-like structure, often deliberately designed to be as joyless and intimidating as possible. This is the absolute bottom of the social ladder. It is the place you go when you have lost everything: your job, your home, your family, your dignity. It is the state's grim solution to the problem of poverty, and within its walls, cleanliness is not a comfort, but a weapon. Should you fall on such hard times that you are forced to throw yourself on the parish, this is where you would end up. Upon entry, you are immediately stripped of the last vestiges of your former life. Your own clothes, filthy and ragged as they may be, are taken from you, fumigated and stored. You are then subjected to the workhouse's version of a welcome bath. This is not the gentle soak of the public bathhouse. It is a rough, dehumanising scrubbing, often in cold water, overseen by a ward official to ensure you are cleansed of any vermin or filth you might be carrying from the outside world. You are then issued the workhouse uniform, coarse, ill-fitting, and identical for everyone. For men, it's a rough smock and trousers. For women, a simple drab dress and cap. This uniform is the first step in erasing your individual identity. Families are immediately broken up. You would be sent to the men's ward, your wife to the women's ward, and your children to the children's ward. You might only be allowed to see them for an hour or so a week, under strict supervision. The principle of the workhouse, enshrined in the New Poor Law of 1834, was less eligibility. This meant that conditions inside the workhouse had to be deliberately worse than the conditions of the lowest paid independent labourer outside. It was designed to be a deterrent, a place so awful that people would do anything to avoid it. The hygiene within the workhouse is rigid, monotonous and punitive. The floors of the dormitories are bare wood, scrubbed daily. The walls are whitewashed with lime, a cheap and effective disinfectant. The beds are simple iron frames with straw-filled mattresses lined up in silent, oppressive rows. There is an absolute obsession with order and cleanliness, but it is a cold, sterile cleanliness devoid of any comfort. It is hygiene as a form of discipline. The daily routine is a relentless cycle of bells, meals and labour. And the labour is deliberately tedious and pointless. As a man, you might be assigned to the stone yard, where you spend your entire day sitting in a small booth, using a heavy hammer to break large rocks into small pieces for roadbeds. Or you might be given the task of oakum picking, which involved untwisting the fibres of old tarred ropes from ships. It was painful, mind-numbing work that left your fingers raw and bleeding. Women were often assigned to the laundry, working in the hot, steamy conditions we've seen before, or to endless sewing and mending. The point of the work was not to be productive, but to be punishing. The diet is meagre and monotonous, calculated to be just enough to sustain life and allow for labour. A typical day's food would be bread and gruel, a thin, watery porridge. For breakfast, bread and cheese for lunch, and more bread and gruel for dinner. It's a diet designed to crush the spirit as much as to fill the belly. A particularly quirky and grim aspect of workhouse life was the pauper's funeral. If you died in the workhouse, your body, if unclaimed by relatives, was the property of the state. You would be buried in a cheap, unmarked grave in a common plot. Before the Anatomy Act of 1832, which provided a legal supply of cadavers for medical schools, the bodies of paupers were often sold to anatomists for dissection. It was the final indignity, your body becoming a tool for scientific study after a life of hardship. Historians still argue about the true intent and effect of the workhouse system. Was it, as its proponents claimed, a necessary if harsh tool to combat idleness and reduce the burden on taxpayers? Or was it, as its critics like Charles Dickens so powerfully argued in novels like Oliver Twist, a cruel and inhumane system that punished people for the crime of being poor? The evidence strongly suggests the latter. The workhouse became a symbol of the Victorian era's darkest side, its fear of social disorder, and its often brutal treatment of the most vulnerable. The enforced cleanliness of the workhouse stands in stark contrast to the filth of the slums from which many of its inhabitants came. But it is a cleanliness without compassion. It is the hygiene of a prison, not a home. It is a system designed to scrub the very identity from a person, to make them a clean, orderly, and interchangeable cog in a machine of social control. As you look at the forbidding walls of the workhouse, you are reminded that in the Victorian world, even an act is seen. The grim shadow of the workhouse and its anonymous paupers' graves follows you as you continue your walk. The finality of death in this era is not a peaceful, distant concept. It's a public and often gruesome reality. Your path takes you by a small ancient parish church huddled between newer buildings. You peer over the low stone wall into its churchyard, and what you see is not a tranquil green space, but a scene of shocking overcrowding and neglect. This is where the story of Victorian hygiene comes to its inevitable earthy conclusion. The ground within the churchyard is not flat. It is a lumpy, undulating terrain, swollen and humped like a poorly made bed. The earth is literally saturated with the dead. For centuries, this small patch of consecrated ground has been the final resting place for the entire parish. Generations upon generations have been buried here, one on top of the other. The churchyard is full. It's not just metaphorically full, it is physically, grotesquely full. The phrase at capacity has a whole different meaning here. As new graves are dug, the sexton's shovel frequently strikes not soil, but the wood of a previous coffin. Or worse, the bones of a previous occupant. Partially decomposed remains are often unearthed and unceremoniously tossed aside to make room for the newly deceased. You might see a fragment of a human jawbone or a rib lying near a freshly turned pile of earth. The air, especially on a damp day, carries a distinct sickly sweet smell of decay. This, to the Victorian nose, is the ultimate miasma, the stench of death itself, believed to be seeping into the air and spreading disease among the living. This burial crisis was a major public health emergency. The overflowing graveyards were not just an offence to decency, they were seen as active sources of pestilence. It was widely reported that the liquids seeping from the saturated ground were contaminating nearby wells, creating a foul-tasting corpse water, and linking the dead to the waterborne diseases that plagued the living, a connection that John Snow's work on cholera made terrifyingly real. The solution was as radical as Bazalgette's sewers. Death had to be moved out of the city. This gave rise to the Great Cemetery movement. Starting in the 1830s, Parliament passed acts that allowed for the establishment of large, privately owned cemeteries in the still rural suburbs surrounding the major cities. In London, this resulted in the Magnificent Seven, a ring of vast, beautifully landscaped burial grounds like Kensal Green, Highgate and Nunhead. You decide to visit one. You take an omnibus out of the chaotic city centre, and after a few miles you arrive at a grand gated entrance. This is not a humble churchyard, it is a meticulously planned estate. You enter and find yourself in a different world. It's a place of winding paths, rolling hills and carefully cultivated trees and flowers. It is part burial ground, part public park. Here, death is given space, order and beauty. Families would come out on a Sunday, not just to mourn, but to picnic, to stroll and to enjoy the clean air and tranquil scenery. The monuments are elaborate and competitive. You see towering obelisks, sorrowful angels, and grand mausoleums built to look like Egyptian temples or Greek shrines. Wealthy families bought large plots, staking their claim to a prime piece of posthumous real estate. This new approach to burial also tapped into a deep-seated Victorian fear, being buried alive. The terror of waking up in a locked coffin was a common trope in Gothic literature, and it led to the wonderfully bizarre invention of the safety coffin. This quirky and macabre device was designed with escape hatches, breathing tubes, or, most famously, a bell-pull system, where a rope was tied to the deceased's finger and connected to a bell on the surface. If the corpse were to awaken, they could signal for help. Unsurprisingly, there are no recorded cases of anyone actually being saved by one, but their existence speaks volumes about the anxieties of the age. Historians still argue whether the cemetery movement was born more from a genuine terror of disease-spreading miasma from the dead, or from a new romantic desire to memorialise loved ones in beautiful, tranquil, nature-filled settings. Was it a sanitary reform or a cultural shift in how death was perceived and aestheticised? It was most likely a powerful combination of both, with a healthy dose of commercial enterprise thrown in. These cemeteries were businesses, and they sold not just burial plots, but the promise of a peaceful, dignified and sanitary end, far from the squalid horror of the city churchyard. As you wander through the peaceful avenues of the dead, you see how the Victorian obsession with order and sanitation has been applied even to the afterlife. Each grave is neatly contained, each monument a testament to a life and a bank account. The chaos and putrefaction of the urban churchyard have been replaced by manicured lawns and polite, silent stone. It is a clean death, a respectable death. They have taken the messiest, most terrifying aspect of human existence and have tidied it up and landscaped it and turned it into a park. It is perhaps the final and most ambitious act of Victorian hygiene. Inly virtuous as cleaning could be twisted into an instrument of punishment and despair. Your long walk through the many layers of Victorian life is drawing to a close. You've woken in the cold, washed from a basin, and navigated a world of dubious food, miraculous cures, and pervasive filth. You've seen the brute force of the workhouse, the terror of the hospital, and the quiet dignity of the suburban cemetery. Now, as the gas lamps begin to hiss to life, casting long, flickering shadows on the damp pavement, you stand and reflect on the immense journey this era has taken in its relationship with cleanliness. The world you inhabit is still a gritty, smelly, and dangerous place by 21st century standards. You can still taste the coal on the air, and the smell of the stables is never far away. But think back to where you started. The Great Stink, once a city-stopping crisis, is now a memory, thanks to the millions of bricks hidden beneath your feet in Basiljetta's sewers. The cholera that once terrified the population, spreading invisibly through the water, is now largely held at bay, its mysteries unravelled by the methodical mind of Jon Snow. The hospital, once a death trap of infection, is slowly, painstakingly being transformed by Lister's carbolic revolution. The very understanding of what makes people sick has undergone a seismic shift, from the vague spectral terror of miasma to the concrete knowable reality of the germ. The changes are not just large-scale and public, they are filtering down into your own home. The bar of carbolic soap by your washstand, once a novelty, is now a household staple, its medicinal smell the new scent of safety. The water closet, once a temperamental luxury for the rich, is becoming more common and more reliable. Is S-bend trap a small but vital piece of engineering protecting your home from the sewer below? Your children, while still exposed to countless dangers, are more likely to survive to adulthood than their grandparents were, thanks to the slow, steady improvements in sanitation and the nascent understanding of contagion. This era's obsession with hygiene was a complex and often contradictory thing. It was driven by fear of disease, fear of the poor, fear of social chaos. It was driven by a deep-seated belief in progress and the power of science and engineering to solve any problem. It was also driven by status anxiety, the desire to display one's respectability through a clean collar, a perfumed parlour, and an unblemished complexion, even if that complexion was achieved with a dusting of lead. A quirky final thought on this is how hygiene itself became a new moral code. The phrase "cleanliness is next to godliness," popularised in this era, wasn't just a saying, it was a deeply held belief that physical purity was a reflection of spiritual and moral worth. The unwashed were not just dirty, they were suspect. Historians still argue about the single most important factor in the dramatic increase in life expectancy during the latter half of the 19th century. Was it the grand engineering projects, the advances in medical science like germ theory and antiseptics, or was it the smaller cumulative improvements in nutrition and domestic cleanliness? The truth is that it was all of it, a messy, overlapping and often accidental revolution on multiple fronts. The sanitarians, fighting their war on smell, inadvertently starved the germs of their breeding grounds. The engineers, trying to solve a stench problem, accidentally cut off the primary route of waterborne disease. The doctors, fumbling towards an understanding of infection, created the sterile conditions that would make modern surgery possible. You stand on the street corner, a citizen of a world in profound transition. You are living on the cusp of the modern age, an age that will be built on the very foundations being laid around you. The public health systems we now take for granted, clean water on tap, functioning sewers, garbage collection, food safety regulations, hospital hygiene protocols, were forged in the filth and fury of your time. They were born from the terror of cholera, the stench of the Thames, the horror of the operating theatre, and the desperate, often misguided attempts to create order and cleanliness in a world that seemed dangerously chaotic. The legacy of this grimy era is, ironically, the clean, safe, and profoundly healthier world that would come after it. You are a survivor of the filth, and a witness to the birth of a cleaner future. Now, as the day ends, your own journey home begins again, back to your lumpy mattress and your chamber pot, but perhaps with a new appreciation for the simple, life-saving changes that are slowly, but surely washing over your world. And so our journey through the grimy, bracing, and surprisingly innovative world of Victorian hygiene comes to a gentle close. We leave our 19th century counterparts standing on the threshold of a new, cleaner era, their world being quietly reshaped by the hidden triumphs of pipes and soap, of science and sanitation. The cacophony of the city begins to soften in your mind. The harsh smells fade, replaced by the familiar comfort of your own quiet room. The struggles of that time, the constant wearing battles against dirt and disease, can now recede, leaving behind only a faint echo, a story whispered from a world away. Allow yourself to feel the weight of your own comfortable bed, the clean softness of your own pillow, and appreciate the silent, invisible systems that keep our modern world so safe and so clean. Let the last images of gaslights on cobblestones dissolve into the peaceful darkness behind your eyelids, as you drift away from the past and into the soft, quiet stillness of your own sweet dreams.